Councilmember Mann,
Present.
Marcus,
Here.
Cilio,
Is here.
Vice Mayor Smith,
Here.
Mayor Paris. We have a quorum.
Okay, just before we get going, we, I think on the agenda inadvertently left one thing out on the wording, so I'm just going to put that in towards the end, that we usually have an opportunity for anybody in the public to speak to the council on any non-agendized items, and so we're going to have that at the end also. And if anybody needs to speak on what we're talking about tonight, go ahead and fill out a speaker's card in the back, so we can at least have the information if we have to get a hold of you. I want to start off and say that we're going to have staff here in a moment give us a little bit of an update. Now, some of us on the council that have been here for a while have heard a number of these informational speeches a number of times, and but we're going to go through it again. There's a few updates. We also have some new council members that need to get updated on some of the water issues that they haven't been involved in before. And I'd like to say, one is to start off and thank staff for the wonderful job that they've been doing over the years. I mean, the money that we've been putting into the purple piping and recycled water, working on the xeriscaping stuff ahead of time, working on different water issues and the integrated water management plan, and Randy, of course, doing a great job on that. There's, I want to try to keep everybody, we're going to have a little introduction, and then we have our only new business item. And we put this on basically to, well, specifically to look at a xeriscaping ordinance. Like I said before, is I think all of us up here, we did it by consensus that we agreed that we needed to look at some kind of landscaping ordinance for new housing. Now, this is the meeting where staff has got to bring to us the nuts and bolts, and we decided to paint the house, and we're just going to decide what color it's going to be. And so hopefully by the time we leave tonight, staff is going to have the information they need to come back to an ordinance. On the bottom, I want to try to keep everybody on point that we stay when we work on item number 2. There's a lot of ideas on water conservation, but item number 2 is the main focus of the meeting, where we want to talk about landscaping ordinance for new housing. Number 3 is where it's going to be open for the council to talk about ideas, any creative ideas, on other types of water conservation ideas, whether it might be a on-demand water heater. It might be any other types of gray water systems, anything that might be for the future. So what we're looking at is something that we need something immediately in the realm of landscaping conservation. The other one is a little bit short-term. Staff is going to have to go back and do some research and come back to us to see where it's appropriate to incorporate it, whether it's in the building code or the planning process. Number 4 is to discuss any other ideas, whether it's planning, whether it's shared governance, whether it's anything that has to do with water that might, that the city might be partners with to save water. So that's where we have it set up at the bottom here. So before we ask staff to start with their presentation, Mr. Bozigian, do you have anything that you'd like to say?
You actually said it very well, and I'd just like to reiterate a couple points. One, I sincerely want to thank staff for all the work they've done over the last couple of years. Water is a very high-profile issue now. It wasn't over the last several years as much, and I really want to thank staff for taking the lead on this, in particular Mr. Williams. Next, staff would request and hope that we come out of this with clear direction. As the Vice Mayor said, there are certain things that we will absolutely be able to take and do immediately in terms of putting in ordinances. There are also things we're going to need to research and come back and maybe say, this isn't quite going to do what you want, here's another idea, and there's some long-term. The other thing that I really want to emphasize with the public is that a lot of ordinances are intended to show what the right thing to do is, and as we talked about last time, voluntary compliance is key because it's the law and it's the right thing to do. Every time we say something in an ordinance or pass a law or put a procedure out, it then takes city staff having to, in particular code enforcement, enforce that, come up with a procedure, come up with exceptions to that, come up with an appeals process. So it's an involved process. So again, voluntary compliance and the community taking this as an issue that's important to all of us will go a long way, as opposed to having to enforce everything.
If I could say one thing to the public before we get started, I'm getting speakers cards here, and of course, it's all on water conservation. But if you can, when we go through the speakers cards, we're going to probably make some kind of decision in direction to staff on some type of landscape ordinance direction. If that's what you're speaking on, then please note that, because we want to, by law, take your input before we give staff direction. If it's on the other types of topics in general water conservation stuff, let's save it for the other discussions. So I'll be going through and making sure those that haven't filled out cards, if you can mark that, but we'll check with you. So, Mr. Bozigian, then whatever staff member is going to give us a presentation.
I think Mr. Williams is coming up, and while he is, I'd like to point out to the members of the public here that the agenda that the Vice Mayor was speaking about is the last page of your staff report, and the staff reports are on the back table if anyone doesn't have those.
Vice Mayor, council members, and all of the members of the public who found opportunity to come join us this evening, I once again welcome you to hear what we have to say about water in Lancaster. It's a topic, as several have said already, has been fresh on the minds of us in the Public Works Department for well over 4 years. It's something that's been on the minds of the community well back into history. And I'm not going to dwell on much of that history for you tonight, having said so much in the past, but there are some things that I want to offer to you in way of preliminary introduction, mostly about why are things so bad today. But first I wanted to just run over with all of you what we're going to be doing in this meeting. This should be a paraphrase of what you're seeing on that final page of the staff report that lays out an agenda. And I wanted to tell you who will be speaking to you in each one of these categories. You'll see them soon. They're those well-dressed engineers who are sitting behind me back here, and I appreciate everybody doing that. I'm going to say just a couple of very brief words about, in way of introduction, about this general status of our water supply and what we have had predicted for us by the State Department of Water Resources and others as it relates to our water supply in 2009 and who knows how far into the future. Pete Zorba is the Associate Environmental Engineer for the City of Lancaster's Public Works Department. He's the only one that fits into that category for the city, so I should have said he is the city's Associate Environmental Engineer. But Pete is going to talk for a few minutes about the pilot recycled water recharge project that Lancaster decided to begin pursuit of now about 2.5 years ago, maybe closer to 3 years. Following Pete, we'll have Nicole West, who is a management analyst also in the Public Works Department, who's been working with others who you see before you this evening to understand what's been going on and contribute to the integrated regional water management planning process. She's going to talk a little about the regional cooperation that we have been able to achieve, and I don't mean we Lancaster, but we the region, and coming to grips with this regional problem of water supply. Steve Dassler used to be our city engineer, but as of an organization change that took place in November, is now the head of our new utility services division in the city of Lancaster. That became necessary because of our recycle water program, but also because of the city's assumption of the sewer maintenance functions beginning the 1st of July this year. Steve's going to talk about some of the programs and the direction that L.A. County, in particular L.A. County Waterworks District 40, is taking us in. Robert Neal, the head of our Development Engineering Division and a building official for the City of Lancaster, will be speaking in brief terms about the water wasting ordinance that was adopted by the council as an urgency ordinance last Tuesday, and also sharing with everyone present some information about, I think it's Assembly Bill 1881. He'll have the specifics on that later. But that is to define for you some of the things that are taking place at state and other levels pertaining specifically to landscape improvements and landscape conservation. So, getting on with that, let me start by sharing with you what our situation is. So what exactly are our challenges? I think that if you start by thinking average, which of course means the mean of a series of numbers, and you add all of those numbers up in that, and then you divide it by the number of numbers that you have, and that gives you the average or the mean. Well, if you think of average, most of the numbers that are up here, these percentages, are based upon averages. So it's necessary to understand that AVEC, as the primary state water contractor in the Antelope Valley area, and Kern County and other parts, well, certainly within their area, within their boundaries, their area of responsibility, they have a contract with the state that says they can get up to 141,000 and some change acre-feet of water a year. But what they rely upon is the amount that actually is delivered on average over a period of time. If my numbers, my memory is correct, their average is about a 66% reliability. So that means not 141,000 acre-feet a year, but something closer to about 93,000 acre-feet a year is the amount that they routinely could expect to receive on or during an average year. But of course, there really is no average year. There are the years of tremendous surplus, and there are the years of tremendous shortage. It so happens that we are getting ready in 2009 to move into another year of tremendous shortage. 2008, the amount of water coming to AVEC was, I think, set at 35% of their contract amount. In 2009, it looks like it may be as low as 10%. I think the range predicted so far by the Department of Water Resources is between 5 and 15%. So again, that average number comes to play. That means that not 141,000 acre-feet in 2009, not the average 93,000 acre-feet, but 14,000 acre-feet of water is all that we think we're going to be able to rely upon coming through the State Water Project to augment supplies that are already here in the valley. That's where these numbers and these percentages come in, and I put them up there so that you can understand how it is that it came to pass that only 10% will be available. So the water content of the snowpack in the Sierras at last recording was about 67% of average. The amount of runoff going into the streams was somewhere between 55 and 65%. And the reason for that is because things are so dry in the Sierras that it's soaking up some of that runoff, in the Sierras before it even gets to us for beneficial use. Now, the State Water Project has a number of large reservoirs along its extent in which water is stored to be released later. And right now, they're at about 48% of capacity overall, which is about 58% of average. So you can see we're right in that range of 55 to 67, 68% of average for just about everything. I've already spoken to 35% delivery in 2008, 10% of contract in 2009. The other issue, and it's probably the issue that will save us for 2008 and 2009, is the issue of adjudication and the water supplies that are pumped out of the ground. There is no adjudication right now. So we do still have the ability to pump some additional water from the ground so long as we have pumping capacity to do that and we don't injure anyone else in the process. So I think we'll see some relief there. I think as children we all probably heard that story about the industrious little ant, who was out working all year long and he was carrying food back to the anthill, for lack of a better term, I guess, and storing it away, and everybody was making fun of that little ant working so hard, but he was doing that because he was storing away food so he'd have it during times of famine. Well, we're kind of like that little ant, or actually the antithesis of that ant, primarily because we haven't been doing anything in this valley to store away that extra water supply to make it possible for us to survive during the years of famine or drought. Those who are connected to the State Water Project who will fare better than we will because of that 10% reduction or 10% of contract amount available to all of us, not just AVEC, they will have been able to do so because they were like the industrious little ant who stored water away. And that's something we have to do as well. And I think the community as a whole, the region as a whole, is moving in that direction, so that's a good thing for us. It's my understanding from past discussions with the council and presentations to you and then feedback from you from the dais that we really have about 4 basic water objectives that the city of Lancaster is trying to develop strategies to move forward with. One of those is we're using more than we have available, so we need to do something about reducing the amount that we're using. And that's what the first item there is. We need to reduce the per capita daily use of water in the Antelope Valley. I think another of the objectives that we have is to figure out ways to use different sources of water that may not be usable as potable water to substitute what now is potable water. So that'll help us also to get through some of these dry periods. We really need to continue to work on developing reliable supplies, something that's more reliable than perhaps going from 10% to 100%, as is possible, though the potential with the State Water Project. That's not a very reliable system, but we need to make use of that water available during those dry years. And that is the way, in the last item, we need to continue to move forward, and that's with banking water for the future. I don't think anybody that is connected with water in the valley has been sitting still, and I wanted to just share with the council a few things that have been done in the Public Works Department and in other departments of the city, just because the departments recognize the need to do something. We started a program about 3 years ago that hadn't been undertaken for a long time, and that was to begin to mulch the areas in the landscape maintenance districts. And, of course, you realize that when you put mulch down, it retains the water, it protects the roots, it allows the plants to thrive with less water. So that was what our objective was, and it's something that we're continuing to do. I'm not going to go over all of these, but a couple of them I did want to highlight. We constructed a new facility out at the maintenance yard for administrative purposes. About 3 years ago was when we finished that facility and moved into it. When we did the design, though, rather than put in this traditional landscaping, we put in artificial turf and we put in low water use plants. We installed bubbler systems for those plants. And altogether, we're saving about 152,000 gallons a year for that small strip of landscaping and artificial turf that very handsomely, I think, decorates the front of that admin facility in the maintenance yard. More recently, we've been looking to the stormwater collection basins, the drainage basins that we have used for retention or detention purposes in the drainage system. We've been trying to figure out how we can use that water instead of allowing it to escape. It's something that's been on our minds for a long time, but more recently we have just, okay, enough is enough. Now we're sending out our water trucks and we're having them pump from those basins any water that may have been collected, nuisance water in those basins, into the tanker truck, and then moving that tanker truck out for road shoulder grading operations or dust control in some other places. So that's saving us about 500,000 gallons of water just within the last 2 months. So it's things that we are trying to do a little differently. We made a decision as we were preparing our budget for you this year that we should cut back the number of days that we irrigate from 7 days a week to 6 days a week. So that's about a 14% savings in water use. I suspect our water bill won't go down 14%, but certainly the amount of water we use for that purpose is going down. And then we've also been trying to find a way that we could replace all of the manual controllers that we have in some 250 landscaped areas of the city. I think there are about 500 of these controllers all over the city within the public rights-of-way. We've been trying to figure out how we can switch them over from manual systems that require someone physically to go there and to adjust them if we want to change the watering schedule, to something that would be more automatic. The Parks Department has been a leader in that area for a number of years by having a computer-controlled system for their parks facilities. They're not quite as broadly spread over the city as our landscape maintenance districts are, so their challenge was a little less than it is for us. We estimate that there's probably about $100,000 of investment necessary to replace our manual controllers with ET or evapotranspiration controllers. But if we do, we know that right off the bat we're going to be able to save about 15% of water. So we're starting to move into that, and we're starting to install them slowly and methodically until we get to the full 100,000. So those are some of the examples that I wanted to share with you, and that concludes my introduction. I would like to, unless there are questions, invite Pete Zorba to come up and share with you about the recycled water program.
Any questions from council members? Randy, if you could maybe, you talked about the a 10% state allocation for AVAC, which would be about 14,000 acre feet. What does that equate for Water District 40? I think they purchase around 40,000 acre feet, or about 40,000 acre feet, pump about 20,000 acre feet. What kind of impact, since they supplied the most of
I think
our
those
customers?
are the numbers that I remember most recently coming from Waterworks. So yes, they pumped around 20,000 acre feet, and they have been purchasing about 40,000 acre feet a year of water. I talked to Russ a couple of weeks ago, and he was telling me that I believe this year he's expecting to deliver about 60,000 acre feet of water altogether. Last year he delivered about 65,000 acre feet, so people are starting to cut back a little bit. But you can see, dropping from 60,000 acre feet in 2008 down to 14,000 acre feet in 2009, that is a severe reduction.
And it seems, I mean, just off the top of my head, that Waterworks takes about maybe 72% of AVAC's allocation, and that would give them about 10,000 acre feet rather than 40,000. So that would give them about a 50% supply to deliver. I mean, in worst case scenario, if we get a 10% allocation from the state. Is that about right, Russ?
Maybe a little
bit.
Yeah, that's
Here or
probably
there,
similar. And of course, Waterworks provides service delivery to both Lancaster, some parts of the unincorporated area, and western Palmdale. So
That's to say without pumping and without more snowpack and everything.
that's right.
Right.
And I will come back up after our other speakers have shared some information to introduce you to some ideas that we have.
Okay. Councilman
Were there other
Cilio?
questions?
Mr. Williams, only because pumping of groundwater is affected by the adjudication lawsuit, or ultimately will be affected by, and I know the judge will be making some decisions in that case in October or November. Could you refresh my memory as to what the issue is he's going to be deciding in the next few months?
For, my goodness, since 1999, this lawsuit has been going on, or variations of the current lawsuit. And during that period of time, there have been a lot of different hearings. It took a number of years before they finally appointed a judge. That was accomplished, if I remember correctly, about 3.5, perhaps 4 years ago. The judge for the last 2 years has been waiting for the work of a technical committee that was trying to do the best they could from research, of documented evidence generated by U.S. Geological Survey and others who have studied water supply in the valleys, natural water supply. So they've been studying that. They've been studying return flows and so forth to find what they felt was the approximate, but as best as anyone could determine, amount of water that annually goes back into the ground to be pumped out again and used again sometime in the future. In October, he's going to begin to hear the evidence of that technical committee, and he hopes to make sometime soon thereafter a determination of how much water there is to allocate. He's not going to make a decision in October about how much to allocate to each individual pumper, but rather how much there is overall to allocate from a safe yield. I suspect that it will still be another perhaps number of years before the full adjudication is completed. Everyone's hoping it will go more quickly because this is a key issue, but one that is more technically driven than the other issues he'll be trying to decide upon.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Williams.
Pete?
Evening, Vice Mayor, members of the City Council. I'm Peter Zorba. Thank you, Randy, for the introduction. I'm the city's environmental engineer, and I'd like to present you an overview of the groundwater recharge pilot project using recycled water. Before I begin, though, let me give you a brief historical reference. In 326 BC, Alexander the Great stood before his army and poured out what remained of their precious water onto the desert floor. This audacious action, right, is a hallmark of leadership by example. and something that should inspire us when we consider the fact that over 2,000 years later, we're confronted by similar circumstances. We're faced with a crisis. Limited water supplies are out of balance with our regional demands. Demands that are a result of population growth, seasonal use fluctuations, and development, agricultural, recreational, and environmental water use and needs. Staff believes that groundwater recharge using recycled water is a means and an opportunity to return and maintain the water balance in the Antelope Valley. So why consider groundwater recharge using recycled water? Beginning in 2011, approximately 10,000 acre-feet a year of recycled water will become available from the Lancaster wastewater treatment plant. This is an incredible resource. Recycled water is locally produced, drought-tolerant, and a reliable source of groundwater resupply. In 2006, the city conducted a feasibility study which showed recharge with recycled water was possible and made long-term fiscal sense, as urban irrigation and industrial reuse alone are not a sufficient maximization or use of this recycled water resource. The feasibility study also identified 3 suitable groundwater banking and spreading locations: Little Rock Creek, Amargosa Creek, and West Lancaster. The pilot project that I'll be talking to you about tonight is located in the West Lancaster spreading area on approximately 96 acres of land currently owned by the city at the southwest corner of Avenue F and 60th Street West. The pilot project is a first step to implementing groundwater recharge using recycled water on any scale. It is comprised of a 5-acre spreading basin located here within the city's land, this orange inverted L shape. It'll be recharging 125 acres of recycled water with 500 acre-feet of diluent or blend water. The objectives are to provide a forum for regional collaboration and public involvement, provide water quality data, demonstrate attainment of regulatory requirements, and tackle institutional barriers while reducing financial risk for participating stakeholders. Why implement this pilot project now? Primarily because groundwater recharge using recycled water takes time. If we began the pilot project today, it would be approximately 2017 to 2020 before we could implement a full-scale groundwater recharge project using recycled water. That's to say, if we had started this 20 years ago, we could be banking water today. Also, cost. The pilot project is estimated to be at least a $7.5 million investment. But outside funding available now could easily offset much of this cost. A recently conducted fatal flaw analysis identified no fatal flaws for this pilot project. However, potential issues continue to be regulatory and environmental constraints, cost, and public outreach and support. Goals and benefits. The intent and benefit of this pilot project is essentially the identification of a regulatory pathway so that you can implement on a full-scale groundwater recharge using recycled water locally. Recycled water has been successfully banked since 1962 in the Montebello Forebay Groundwater Recharge Project, as well as currently in the Orange County Groundwater Replenishment System Project. Knowledge is power, and the knowledge acquired from this pilot project could easily be a jumping-off point, resulting in over 10,000 acre-feet a year of new, local, and reliable water supply through groundwater recharge with recycled water. Furthermore, securing the support of policymakers such as yourselves and key partners, as well as the public, for this and related regional projects is a fundamental goal of the pilot project, and making it a catalyst for a regional water awareness campaign. The ultimate goal of the pilot project is to increase Antelope Valley's overall water supply and enable future local operational scale groundwater recharge projects using recycled water by acting as a regional pathfinder, innovator, and leader. Next steps. As you can see, there are many next steps. As success factors include regulatory and environmental coordination and collaboration with entities such as the Regional Water Quality Control Board, California Department of Fish and Game, California Department of Health, and even the Fox Field Airfield Management. Capitalizing on outside fundings such as Prop 50, Prop 84, Prop 1E, and AB 303 are also a significant next step. Success, as always, is based on continued communication and commitment between regional partners, many of whom are here tonight in the audience. Partners such as AVEC, the BIA, City of Palmdale, County Sanitation Districts of Los Angeles County Waterworks, Palmdale Water District, Quartz Hill Water District, and Rosamond Community Service Districts. Regarding subsequent cost sharing with our partners, we're at that point now where we're hoping, with no guarantees, for $1.5 million for design. Regardless, local water issues are too critical. I encourage the City Council to continue to lead by example in this arena. And if necessary, we should be prepared to move forward with this groundwater recharge pilot project unilaterally to benefit the future of the city as well as the region. That's all I have. Thank you. Any questions?
You know, I believe, isn't this one of the projects of the 7 that was identified by the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan?
Yes, sir. The city proposed 4 projects. 2 of them were considered high priority by the IWRMP. When the top 10 high priority projects were scaled down to 7, 1 fell out, and this was the one that remained. It's definitely one of the high priority projects for the IWRMP.
I think the totality of the projects, the price tag was about $200 million, if I'm not mistaken, and this project was $7 million. I think we were thinking about getting Prop 50 money from that, but now is it my understanding that that opportunity for that grant money, at least at this time, has fallen through? Or
yes, sir, that's correct.
So what revenue stream are we looking at to fund the $7 million?
Right now, sir, as I mentioned, there are a number of grant funding opportunities out there. We haven't begun to pursue them as we had done the Prop 50 funding, and we've reassessed the cost-sharing matrix, if you will, between the partners, and have spent, actually we spent last week meeting with those stakeholders and those regional partners to discuss that new assessment.
Was the Prop 50 money a one-time shot, or was it over a certain period of time? I know that there was, I think the state was giving a reason that we didn't look like we were, a large enough unit together. Is that something that can be fixed for the future?
I'm not sure that that was the entire reason. That may have been a facet of it. I'm sure Mr. Williams can address that more cohesively. But I know that we're looking at opportunities to kind of recover from that and pursue, if not that again, but other funding sources.
Mr. Vice Mayor, let me just expand a little bit on what Mr. Zorba shared with you. When the announcement of the state was made that the Antelope Valley would not get any of the $25 million that had been requested in grant funds, the leadership team that had been formed from the Regional Water Management Group, that will be addressed very shortly here, decided not to just accept that and have made multiple trips to Sacramento. They've been lobbying with persons from the legislature and with their staffs and so forth, and trying to figure out ways that we could convince them to change their mind, expecting that we would be unsuccessful, but nonetheless we wouldn't feel like we were doing our jobs unless we undertook those steps. So we've been doing that forcefully. In fact, I one day went myself and made a presentation to the collected assembly about that particular grant request. And I was as unsuccessful as anyone else was in that regard. Prop 84, though, is a new proposition that has a new opportunity for similar kinds of money. Prop 50 was something that was adopted about 2 years or so before Prop 84 was adopted. Prop 84 was part of the November 2006 ballot measures that the California voters voted on. So they're just now, this would be the first of the Prop 84 monies to be allocated. The downside of it for us is that they've already made a decision that this time what they're doing is allocating a finite amount of money to each of the regional water control districts. And we being in the Lahontan region, which is the least populated region, are getting a very small amount as a region. The other thing we have is within our region there are 3. Most other regions have a single integrated regional water management plan or group similar to ours, so we will be competing with 2 others. but we're trying to do our level best to make sure that as a region, again, we go forward and request as much money as we can. I think one thing that we have to do as a region is to go back now and to take a look at these 7 projects and say, okay, which one is the ones that will give us the most benefit? Of course, my staff and I believe it's this project, but that remains to be seen.
Thank you. Any other question from Mr. Zorba?
You mentioned reassessing the cost-sharing matrix.
Yes, sir.
In English, is that going to the other agencies that deliver water and government agencies with our handout, seeing what we can come up with?
No, I wouldn't say with our handout in so much as, unless you were offering it as a handshake, because you're going to your partners, your regional partners that have been involved with this, and this is an ongoing process. This project's been going on now in some way, shape, or form for probably about 3 years. So you're going to people that you've been communicating with, I've been communicating with, and working with for over 3 years, and you sit down and you say, okay, we stumbled, we didn't receive the Prop 50 funding, now let's reassess where we are and see what we need to do go forward. Not necessarily, I would not say that we go with hat in hand.
So making a best case presentation of why it's beneficial to both the city and to the other agencies.
Yes, sir. The benefit here, if I didn't make it clear, I just want to reemphasize this. The benefit is a regional benefit. The fact that Lancaster's been taking, let's say, shouldering a load disproportionate to the benefit we may receive, but Lancaster's been doing heavy lifting and has assumed a mantle of leadership for the last couple of years on this. So we should be proud of what we've done, but we can't go further, I don't think, without really the commitments of our partners. And I think that unless we make the commitment first ourselves that we are going to go and we're going to make this happen, we won't see those partners really fall in step with us.
Let me again expand just a little bit on that. What may not be obvious is the regional benefit for everybody, because Pete showed you the various areas where recharge has been determined geologically to be a good practice. Those areas also could receive recycled water, or some of them at least could be. What we're doing is, through this pilot project, is developing the necessary data for the public and for the regulatory agencies to be convinced that this is a safe and a productive process for any place in the Antelope Valley. So if we are successful, while it's taking us 5 to 7 years to get through this process of gaining the necessary approvals by the state and the public, once it's obtained, then all of the water districts will be able to go through the process probably, for a similar kind of a spreading field in maybe 2 years instead of 7 or 8 years. So it's just going to be something beneficial to everyone. The other thing is, for everyone who contributes money to this program, they get a proportionate share of whatever water will be stored in this bank during this pilot program. Granted, it's going to be 625 acre-feet a year only for the next 4 years or so, but it is water, and it is, does have some value. So we think those two things are the way that we are making this a value to the region overall. Pete talked about 10,000 acre-feet coming out of the District 14 plant. There's another similar amount that will be available from the District 20 plant. So we're talking about a lot of water that can be made available simply by this recharge opportunity, dependent upon our ability to demonstrate and convince everyone that it is something that is a good thing and a wise thing to do. Again, we're sold on it, but now we have to deliver the goods.
I think you just raised an important point that everyone should understand, and that's that the city of Lancaster is taking a lead role in making this happen, and not to say rah rah Lancaster, but just the way the water delivery agencies and regulatory and environmental agencies came to be. There is no single entity in charge of water for the Antelope Valley, and this effort is an attempt to find a pathway to use recharge water, to squeeze, not to be a pun, every drop we can, because we just don't have enough.
I mentioned that knowledge is power, and I think that's one of the primary benefits of this project, is the knowledge that comes out, that's ascertained, the data that's analyzed, that can be used, that's transferred. That knowledge is transferred to whoever the entity is that takes that torch and runs with it and implements the large-scale groundwater recharge project in the valley. And when they do that, we all win. So that's always been a major component of this and a major benefit, if not the most beneficial part. Anything else?
Anything else? Thank you, Mr. Zerba.
Thank you, sir.
Now we'll hear from Nicole West on the Regional Water Management Group.
Good evening, Mr. Vice Mayor and City Council members. Recently, dozens of individuals, public agencies, and community groups in the Antelope Valley made new strides in collaborative work on water by participating in the Integrated Regional Water Management Plan. These stakeholders recognize that water resource needs are interconnected, and decision makers must have a broad perspective to deliver efficient water services. If you've been reading the water articles in the Antelope Valley Press the last couple of days, like I have, you'll know that past attempts at forming water groups in the Antelope Valley have not been successful. But this plan has been successful, and that's because adopted regional integrated plans are mandatory to receive state funding under Proposition 50, passed by California voters in 2002, and Proposition 84, passed in 2006. Development of the plan began with the formation of the Regional Water Management Group, and these are the signatories to the Memorandum of Understanding. We have all three state water contractors here in the Antelope Valley, the major water retailers, and both the cities of Lancaster and Palmdale. The Integrated Regional Plan is first and foremost a planning and feasibility document. It lists projects that help, if implemented, help bridge the gap between a dwindling water supply and also an increasing demand. It required, and it requires in the future, a broad regional commitment and certainly a broad regional investment, which I'll get into. And here's a bona fide proof that we did meet. Here's a picture from one of the stakeholder groups. Many people in the audience here today are also in that picture. They started meeting in 2006, and the plan was adopted by the City Council in December of 2007. One of the first tasks for the RWMG was arriving at a number of objectives for the plan, and these included, well, these are management of water supply, water quality, flood management, environmental resource, and land use planning. Project selection had four, I think, unique aspects. One, the first thing was a call for projects in which member agencies of the RWMG were asked to submit projects. In some cases, some of the projects were already implemented or they were ongoing and they were just added to a project list. They could be submitted at any time, so there wasn't a short window where people had to get all of the projects in. Some of the projects, of course, huge construction projects have a lot of aspects that take time, so you could submit it at any time. And there was also a project roadshow where a consultant team would go out and talk with individual members of the RWMG and consult with them on the projects. And finally, they were evaluated and ranked by the stakeholders according to a very long and specific criteria. And like Vice Mayor Smith and Mr. Cilio mentioned, significant investment is required. We submitted 7 projects under the Proposition 50 application, and we requested $25 million, which was only 12% of the total project costs. As you know, unfortunately, we did not receive funding under that competitive grant process, but even if we did, there was a huge amount of money that would need to be raised for these projects to go forward. And I think there were 3 unique successes of the plan process. One was the facilitated broad agreement. The plan was ruled by consensus. If you were there at a stakeholder meeting, you had a vote and you had a voice. If you wanted to present your idea, it was presented to the group and you could vote on those ideas. The second was increased working relationships. I know in my case, I walked into those meetings and didn't know other people working on water issues. And the facilitator, Ken Kirby, mentioned that when people started meeting in 2006, once the meeting was over, people would gather up their papers and go back to their office. But people started in 2007 talking, lingering after the meetings, going out to lunch. And I think that that's really important. I know that I've benefited, and other members of the Lancaster staff have benefited from those working relationships. If I need something, I call up other stakeholders from the RWMP, and they're very happy to give me information. It makes my job much easier. And the third was public outreach. The Public Outreach Committee was one of the most enthusiastic committees on in the plan, and I don't say that just because I was on that committee. But we covered every inch of the valley, going to rural town councils, getting the word out on the plan, and I think this was a really great effort. It was not secretive. People knew about the plan. They could submit ideas. It was really a great process, and I think it serves as a terrific launching pad for any of the public outreach efforts that the city wants to do and the city council wants to do here in Lancaster, that we've laid that groundwork for public outreach, and we can really build upon that. As I said, the IRWMP stakeholders recognize that water resource needs are interconnected, and decision makers all over the valley must have a broad perspective to deliver effective water services. The IRWMP provides a springboard for any project the Lancaster City Council would like to implement for the benefit of Lancaster and the entire Antelope Valley. And with that, I can answer any questions on the Regional Water Management Group.
Just go ahead, Councilman Mitt. Good. Yeah, Ms. West, if you could, as Councilman Cilio said and Mr. Zorba said, that it's going to take an investment. What was the final number on the total amount of the 7 projects? Was that $200 million? I know we were going to request $25 million for some.
I think it was in the neighborhood of $200 million.
$200 million, and that's only for the 7 projects.
Just for the 7
Integrated
projects.
Water Management. Okay.
Yes.
Thanks. Any other questions? Thank you.
Thank you.
Now we'll hear from Steve Dassler.
Good evening, Vice Mayor Smith and council members. I'm Steve Dassler, Utility Services Manager for the city. The purpose of my remarks tonight is to briefly share with the council an overview of some of what Los Angeles County Waterworks District is doing with respect to water conservation. This slide that I'm showing shows the boundaries of the various water districts that serve the city of Lancaster, Palmdale, and the surrounding county areas. And the reason that I show it is just briefly to let you know that ordinances that I'm going to talk about in just a minute really they're not applicable to the city of Lancaster itself, but to the county area around the city, with the exception of a phased water conservation plan, which is applicable to the city, to citizens of the city of Lancaster that are in the Waterworks, LA County Waterworks District 40. The ordinances listed there are ones that the county has or has had in effect over the years. The first ordinance actually has a sunset clause in, or had a sunset clause in it, that it was only valid until 1993, January 1st of 1993. The reason I mention it is that an action by the Board of Supervisors just on July 1st of this year is going to go back and take a look at that and review it and update that particular ordinance so that it will then be active again, but it will be in the in unincorporated territory of the county. So briefly, each of these ordinances helps to or encourages water conservation in varying ways. The first one prohibited water wasting activities such as washing down paved surfaces with a hose, limited irrigation hours, placed restrictions on washing other vehicles without a hose with a self-closing nozzle, required that a glass of water in a restaurant to be requested by the customer rather than being offered without being asked. Again, these were, it has a penalty clause with it, $100 for the first violation, $500 for subsequent violations, and was applicable again only in the county area and for existing uses. The second one encouraged landscape irrigation audits and prohibited inefficient and inappropriate landscape irrigation allowed for a property tax assessment on a roll to make sure that after the audit was done, if there were corrections that needed to happen, that they could fund those. County would have a way to make sure those corrections got made. Again, had the same penalty clauses: $100 for the first violation, $500 for subsequent violations, and applied to existing development in the unincorporated LA County. The third one is applies only to new development, subdivision, and doesn't have a penalty clause with it, but required any subdivision with 8 lots or more to take one lot and show how water efficient landscaping could be performed. This particular policy of the city or the county of Los Angeles is a phased water conservation plan, and is really more of a drought management plan. It's not in place all the time. It comes into play when drought conditions occur, and the county board of supervisors has to bring it into play by declaring such. Basically, failure to meet a targeted decrease in the amount of water that each household would be allowed increases the cost of water to the wasteful consumer. This plan will also be re-reviewed by LA County Waterworks in the near future. It was established in '91 and hasn't been reviewed since then. Here are some of the conservation efforts that Waterworks has been involved in since about 2007. They have a public education program that consists of more than 1,500 television and radio and newspaper ads. They've got 3 billboards out and a movie theater ad, and also various press releases they put out on a regular basis. There's a new customer rebate program for water-saving devices, purchasing water-saving devices, and I have another slide that I'll show you some more on that. They offer a free on-site water use audit for all residential, commercial, and public sector customers. They publish the quarterly newsletter called The Splash. You've probably seen that in your bill when you receive that. And they also have a website for conservation information. They also became signatory to an MOU, a Memorandum of Understanding, that included 14 best management practices, some of which are the ones that I shared in the previous slide that they put into play. Another item was an aquifer storage recovery system, and with that they had the ability to inject into the ground 6,800 acre-feet a year of state water project water into the groundwater basin. Now, it's been in place since November of 2005, and during that, since then till now, they've put 3,000 acre-feet of water into the aquifer, or into the basin. We've entered an agreement with them to construct the recycled water line in Division Street. They put into place charges for water supply reliability charges that include a banking, groundwater supply, and recycled water elements of that charge that's applicable to all new development. And they also have in place tiered water rates, so the more water that you use, the more that you pay for that additional water. This slide shows some of the devices, water-saving devices that are available in the rebate program. This program just went into effect, I think it was June 8th of this year. They have $300,000 in the program to make rebates, and there's a website that you can get to find out more about that. And then finally, a report made to the Board of Supervisors on July 1st had several recommendations in it. Basically, they were to help bring the county, all the county departments, to become more water conscious and more water wise. One of them in particular, this alert that was declared, or actually is to be declared by a resolution that I don't think has occurred yet, but there's a resolution forthcoming. It will intensify water conservation efforts in order to achieve a 15 to 20% reduction in overall water demand. Another one was to the ordinance that I talked about earlier, this water wasting ordinance that had been discontinued, sunsetted, is going to be reviewed and revised and brought back to the board in the form of an ordinance for adoption. They're also sending letters of support to the governor and state officials requesting or supporting the governor's Delta Division project, and also the requesting additional funding through the Prop 84 and Prop 1E programs. And other than that, again, the intent of those our efforts are to get the whole county on board with water conservation. And that concludes my remarks, unless you have any questions.
Mr. Vice Mayor, if I could offer just a couple of additional points of clarification on Steve's presentation for you. Again, to emphasize that the three ordinances that he showed in the very first slide pertain only to the unincorporated area and not to the cities of Lancaster or Palmdale. That's an important thing to keep in mind. And I think the reason the county does that is because they look to the cities to exercise their police powers for establishing specific programs, as our council is doing, and that's going to be a big help for all of us. The second one has to do with the Aquifer Storage Recovery Program, and Steve mentioned that it's state water project water that they've been using for that purpose. It's important to emphasize that that is state water project that has been fully through the potable treatment process at AVEC. It's not just raw water that comes down through the aqueduct. There has been some confusion about that stated by various people in the community in recent months, and I just wanted to make sure we got that clear.
One question, I had to find the slide back here. In the unincorporated areas, when it comes to the LA County policies on the phased water conservation, the drought management plan, has the Board of Supervisors triggered that for the unincorporated areas, now that there's been a drought?
I'm not aware that it's been set up officially there. I mean, I've heard of the 10% kind of reduction, voluntary type reduction, but I'm not aware of an actual resolution or declaration that puts that into place at this time.
Okay. Okay, thanks. Any questions, Mr. Dashler?
The water that's the AVEC treated water that's being injected into the aquifer, does that come out of the now what appears to be 14,000 acre feet, and they're putting in 6,000?
They have the ability to put in 6,800 acre feet a year. They've only put in 3,000 acre feet. Part of that's due to the availability of additional water, and part of it's due to the quality of the water at various times.
And what do we suspect is going to happen this year, given the severe cuts we face? Are they going to do away with that this year, put it on hold, or just greatly reduce the amount? Do we know what their plans are?
Don't know for sure, but I would imagine because of the lack of water, there won't be extra water to put into the ground, and so it'll probably be reduced in number at least.
Thank you.
Well, now hear from Robert Neal.
Well, I wish I was as tall as Steve. Vice Mayor Smith and fellow council members, I am Robert Neal, the Development Engineering Division Manager. It is my privilege this evening to talk to you about our water wasting ordinance and possible amendments to it. First of all, I want to say that I feel that our emergency ordinance is actually very well done. It's been easy for staff to explain to citizens who have called us about it. So I will keep my remarks brief. Do we need a water wasting ordinance? As you can see in this slide, we absolutely do. Nuisance water is prevalent throughout Lancaster. Nuisance water is wasted water. Do you see that concrete splash apron in the photo? That is not a typical design feature of our streets. It's the result of repair to damage caused by the constant day in and day out flow of water. Where does this water come from? There are a lot of yards that overwater as shown in this slide. In this particular photo, you can see the water has been present long enough for moss to form in the gutter. Some people think that extra watering keeps their lawns greener. That's not true. Overwatering causes a lot of problems to property owners as shown in this slide. So what can we do to strengthen or better our water wasting ordinance? This slide shows three ideas. First, we could make it illegal to water any hardscape like sidewalks and driveways. This may be too drastic for our community, but there are other communities that are starting to cite property owners for the watering of hardscape. Although our watering ordinance has only been in place a few days, we have already gotten calls about its applicability to swimming pools. The ordinance could be expanded to include the filling and draining of pools. Currently, we recommend to those who call us that swimming pools be drained to the sewer so that the pool water may be recycled. The last item on this list may not conserve large amounts of water, but if we were to require restaurants to post signage about only serving water upon request, we would be sending a message to visitors and residents that water conservation is important to our community. I will conclude with these thoughts. Water wasting is a problem in Lancaster. I believe the emergency water wasting ordinance is necessary and timely. The ordinance, as revised, is fairly well written. As an aside, I had asked our code enforcement attorney to review the ordinance. The most significant comment, other than some wordsmithing, was the need for the definition of beneficial use. The ordinance gives us the tools that we need as staff to begin curtailing water wasting that is happening in our community. I want to thank the City Council for your time and ask if there's any questions.
Any questions from Mr. Neal?
I would agree that requiring customers to ask for water at restaurants wouldn't save a large amount of money, but it's a key education component. You mentioned requiring permits to fill pools. I'm a little...
Well, maybe you're asking what's the benefit of that?
Absolutely.
Actually, in times of true water shortages, it gives us the ability to control the amount of water that's going out.
I just wonder how many pools we fill a day. But anyway, I understand the intent.
Well,
now, Mr. Neal, well, let me ask you this question. When you're talking about filling, you're talking about if the pool was drained and then they want to fill the complete pool, like they're building a pool and they want to fill. So part of that could be part of the, they have to get a permit to build a pool in the first place.
Yes, sir.
Because, I mean, everybody that has a pool in the summer has to fill it, you know, once a month or something because of the evaporation anyway, right? So you're not talking about getting a permit to go, hey, you know, my filter can't drain, so I got to put 3 more inches on it. All right, we're not talking about that.
You're absolutely correct. We're not talking about that. I think the issue that we're trying to address is a lot of times pools are drained out to the streets and they look like nuisance water. And so if a person's draining water out to the street, they have a permit to do it because it has a legitimate purpose.
We actually discussed this. I was discussing this with staff even a couple weeks ago about putting it into the sewer system because then it could be recycled water. And I had to inquire, I don't know if we've gotten back from the sanitation district, that, you know, depending on how many pools have to be drained per summer, can they handle that influx? Actually, all that chlorine and stuff should help them take care of the water. But I didn't get word back on what they would think about that if we did implement that.
As Mr. Neal indicated, you know, it becomes a problem when the plant starts reaching its capacity because wastewater flow through a wastewater treatment plant is pretty steady through the year. So certainly adding water from draining pools would increase the amount of water that would be going into that plant. What do we normally experience? 10 to 15,000 gallons of water when you drain a pool. So it's not an enormous amount, but nevertheless, it is something. You know, our plant right now is capable, the District 14 plant that serves Lancaster, is capable of treating 16 million gallons a day. So, you know, 10,000 gallons is not a huge amount. The purpose behind the permit, and by the way...
A no-cost permit is what you're talking about.
I was going to say, it would be a no-cost permit, was so that if we knew that someone was planning to drain their pool and we knew that somebody else had the need for some water, say, for example, dust control in a nearby project, then we could maybe work out some kind of an arrangement to put that water directly to use, or as suggested by Mr. Neal, we put it back into the sanitary sewer system so that it becomes recycled water.
Now, I checked with a couple builders on that, and they said the problem with that would be, one is that it would flow too slow to fill up their tankers, and second, the city wouldn't let their big trucks go into the residential areas. So I don't know. I mean, it's a great idea for dust abatement, but I think we need to take it one step further on how do we actually, what's the mechanism?
I think the introduction that City Manager Mr. Bosigian shared was right on target for everything that we are proposing to do tonight. there is a reason not to do it as well as a reason to do it. And so what we're faced with is trying to come to a decision as to, does the benefits of this one outweigh the benefits over here? And so, you know, it's like everything else in life, it's a balancing act.
Right.
And we happen to be in a situation where now we're trying to figure out how we can balance water supplies with water demand.
So we could see possibly staff coming back with some other additional ideas on, I know our emergency ordinance was something that we needed to get done here before summer was over, but some of these ideas, as Robert has...
If Robert would go back to the last slide, there were 3 items on there, and if the council would like for us to do some additional work to develop how these might be added to the water wasting ordinance or some future ordinance, you know, just tell us which ones you would like for us to work on, and we'll make sure we include that, bring back the pros and the cons in each case, and then let you make a decision at that time.
Well, for myself, I mean, if it's a consensus of the council, I think prohibiting the runoff on the landscaping as long as it's not too onerous. I mean, there's got to be some runoff sometimes, but I mean, we put some numbers in there as long as it's workable. The second one also, if it was a no cost for the pools, and that's only for putting it into the sanitation, your clean out, and that would be okay, but we have to manage it so one day, you know, 50 pools don't get drained and the sanitation district gets upset at us. Requiring my own personal viewpoint, requiring restaurants to serve water only upon request. I don't know if I'm that far to put that big of an onus on businesses. I think through our business license process, maybe we need to encourage it, and that's where I would go first on something like that, especially since it's not going to be that much. It's more of a statement, and if you get businesses, maybe the Chamber of Commerce and stuff, to encourage that also, rather than say, for a very small amount of water, we're going to ding you for it. So I don't know how the rest of the council feels, but the first 2 are good. The last one, I think it should be an educational thing.
There are already a number of restaurants in Lancaster that follow this policy just because it's their matter of practice.
Oh, yeah, that's, given my background in the restaurant field, I would probably go to maybe even, we didn't address hotels, you know, in some of the more arid climates. Hotels actually have similar policies. We might want to add that to it. And one of the things that we haven't talked about, but maybe we'll get to at some point in time when we get into discussions, is covering of pools. I know we're looking at maybe some items to add to that existing ordinance, but maybe we need to look at that too, because obviously there's some tremendous amount of evaporation taking place, especially with new ordinances going forward.
As the Vice Mayor pointed out when he gave his introduction, the very end of our presentation today will list a number of ideas for the council to consider and give us direction on, and I think you'll find some of that discussion included there.
So we'll I guess if it's okay with everybody else, then we'll just continue that discussion on other water saving or adding to the conservation one after the landscape ordinance discussion. If that's okay with everybody else?
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. Neal. Now we're at the landscape design ordinance for new development and existing, well, it says existing properties, but I think what we're talking about right now, I think it was supposed to be scratched.
No, Mr. Neal is going to give another presentation, first of all, about the state programs in their landscaping ordinance to give you some preliminary information that will lead into...
Is that item F?
No, that's ongoing right now. So he's ready to do that.
That's item F, correct? Right, that's what I thought. That's what I was...
Okay, I thought you were referring to the new development ideas that...
No, it says here, item F is landscaping design ordinance for new development and existing properties, and that would be the state project.
Okay, well, I guess I've got the wrong agenda in front of me. I'm sorry for that.
Oh, that's okay.
I think I got the same one that he has. A little bit different.
Yeah, the old one. Oh.
Mr. Vice Mayor and City Council, thank you again. In this part of the presentation, I will review state laws that will impact the way we craft a landscape ordinance and make some comparisons between water conserving and water intensive landscaping here in Lancaster and other places. I will try to be concise so as to conserve as much time for discussion as I can. So let's Let's jump right into the state ordinances. The first state-mandated water-efficient landscaping requirements came in the early 1990s. In response to Assembly Bill 325, the City of Lancaster adopted our water-efficient landscaping ordinance 629. Our ordinance has holes so big that you can drive a truck through them. The result, I'm sorry,
Water truck?
a water truck through them. The result is that there hasn't been as much water-conserving landscaping as there should be. The state decided to assess the effectiveness of Assembly Bill 325 by convening a task force. The task force made 43 recommendations that are presented in this executive summary that you have. Using many of these recommendations, Assembly Bill 1881 will publish an updated water efficient landscape standard next January and require all cities to have landscape ordinances at least as effective as that standard a year later, in January 2010. In the existing and future landscape standards, there will be a required water budget calculations that will determine the maximum water allowance for a project. The underlying assumption in this calculation is found in the ET, the evapotranspiration adjustment factor, which is 0.7 in the formula shown. The assumption that is used to meet this standard is a plant factor of approximately 0.5. That would mean roughly 1/3 of plants could be high water use like grass, 1/3 moderate water use, and 1/3 low water use plants. So let's take a look at some landscaping found in Lancaster. In the recently built Portofino tract, much of the front yard landscaping is turf, which is a high water use plant. There are some developers who, however, are concerned about water usage. One is the builder of Old Bell Sol tract. Very little water is used in the front yard of this model. What appears to be grass is actually artificial turf. Note the rock mulch border along the sidewalks in an effort to retain water. It is interesting in this slide to note that Westview Estates tract, where there's problems with water pressure, there's extensive planting of turf. 3/4 of water use is outside most Lancaster homes. In the Westview home shown, maybe it's higher than that. The Martha Stewart tract model home shown in the right demonstrates that a water-efficient yard can be attractive. And again, there is artificial turf there. A lot of Lancaster neighborhoods have extensive turf and paved areas. The photo on the right shows a Las Vegas home where there is no turf in the front yard, and a lot more western communities are doing that. This slide shows two houses from the Conchola Valley, which has approximately the same evaporation rate as evapotranspiration rate as we have. That means they have approximately the same water demand as we have. The home on the left uses a little over 2 acre-feet of water per year, which is a lot of water. 75% of its water usage is outside. The home on the right uses about a 1/2 acre-foot of water per year. 75% of its water usage is actually interior. A benefit of using more native and water-efficient landscapes, as shown on the right, is often there's a reduction in green waste generation and labor to maintain the landscaping. Assembly Bill 1881 will require the use of weather-based irrigation controllers like the one shown, or soil moisture-based controllers. The state ordinance would also limit overhead irrigation to the hours of 8 p.m. to 10 a.m. unless weather conditions were unfavorable. This slide shows a common problem in Lancaster, the overspraying of irrigation systems onto our sidewalks and streets. State mandates will do much to limit overspraying and runoff by prohibiting turf on slopes that are greater than 4:1 and require subsurface irrigation within 24 inches of non-permeable hardscapes. The little tubes shown in this photo, if you can see them, are devices used to measure irrigation efficiency. The state ordinance would require post-installation audits of landscaped areas. There are some important exemptions from the proposed model ordinance language. These include exemptions for playgrounds and some partial exemptions for cemeteries. What's notable is that there's an exemption for all landscaped areas less than 2,500 square feet, which would exempt most housing and small commercial projects. In the next section, you'll be given a palette of water conservation options. I hope you take two things away from my presentation. The first is that there are rapidly coming state water efficient landscape mandates that will dramatically reduce the amount of water we are permitted to use in our landscaping, assuming we are responsible in the enforcement of these requirements. The second thing I hope that you will note is that water-efficient landscaping can be attractive and beneficial to our community. Thank you, Mr. Vice Mayor and council members. I'm ready to respond to questions if you have them.
Any questions for Mr. Neal? Do we have any other pictures of xeriscaping or anything that we've collected to show tonight?
No, sir. What Mr. Neal has shared with the council is what we brought tonight.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. With that, I'll turn it back over to Mr. Williams.
This is the part of the evening where we hope we can engage the council and, as you may desire, others in conversation about different ideas. I do not intend to dwell on each of them. I think that's just a matter of courtesy for time, but any of the items that are on the list that would like to be discussed that are not clearly understood just by their being on the list, please raise them to my attention. A couple of things that I did want to point out on this particular list, and let me start by saying you'll remember in your very first physics class that they taught you that the first law of physics is that for every action there is an equal and opposite reaction. And that's kind of where we are with all of this information now regarding water conservation, whether it be for landscaping, non-landscaping, or other measures that we might consider as a city to adopt. Everything that we do up here is done the way it is now because in past years it was decided that was the best way to do it. And so the reaction that we got back was least impactful. And again, now we have to decide where's the right balance for these things. It's perhaps time, and I think it is time, for us to start adopting some new things that will help us to move into next year, next decade, and perhaps the next century to be better prepared for water future. We have presently an approved plant list. That's part of Ordinance 629 mentioned by Mr. Neal. That ordinance needs to be updated so that we can't drive water trucks through the holes in it again. And staff certainly will be working on that, and I think what we'll be hearing in direction from council this evening will guide us along those lines. That plant list is not an up-to-date list, but as some in the room know, that about 2.5 years ago, we formed a group in the Antelope Valley that was called the Antelope Valley Water Conservation Coalition, and they have developed an extensive plant list that would be offered to substitute for what now is in Ordinance 629. And I think it is a more localized and a more regionalized version of a plant list that will show up in AB 1881. So it's moving definitely in the right direction. The second item on there, full landscaping by developers, what that means is simply that we would condition new residential developments that the builder would install landscaping in both front and backyards. And that would give us, it would do a number of things, but it would make it possible for homeowners to have a fully landscaped property, and it probably would also discourage them from going in and putting something in themselves that would be a more water-using type of an installation. Wanted to address quickly the separate meters for landscape and domestic service. AB 1881 will call for that for landscaped areas that are greater than 5,000 square feet. We think, and it would not apply to residential properties. I personally think that it might be something we'd want to consider across the board, require separate meters for landscaping and separate meters for the domestic service. Think of the domestic service as being the lifeline. That's what we need to run through the tap and the showers and the toilets and whatnot. And then the other meter would handle all of those outside uses. It would lead into another option that we'll show you in just a minute here. Are there any questions or clarification that council would need on any of these items?
Well, what I was hoping that we would do is that if you want to go through the presentation on this before we get into the council discussion and making decisions, I think we should take the public input that they wanted to do, because we need to do that before we make our decisions.
Okay.
So if there's anything else that you wanted just to go over, I'm sure the councils were going to go back and this is going to be our discussion point.
Okay, altogether there are about 6 slides like this that offer some ideas, so I'll be happy to go through them quickly. I just want to make sure that if you want a deeper discussion about any particular item that we can offer.
Council just wants an overview. Is that fine? We'll do an overview of the slides, then we'll go back and get into the meat of it after we take the public input.
Very good, sir.
Could you clarify one thing that you discussed, and that was separate meters for landscape and domestic service? Is that with the intent of billing at separate rates, or just simply for tracking usage?
You're way ahead of me, sir. That's on a later proposed item.
I'll be quiet then.
I just have one important question for you. What's the second law of thermodynamics?
I will speak to that later, sir. On the second slide, and I would like to point out for those in the audience that in the back page, on the back table back there, we did provide copies of all of these ideas. We didn't give you the full presentation, but we did make these ideas available so that you would have them to consider. Continuing with things that might be done with regard to landscaping and new developments. We think that it would be a good idea at the time that the developer submits their designs for individual homes, that they also submit a water budget based upon all of what we're talking about today that would say, this is how much this landscaping and this home is expected to use. And then that would be announced to the purchaser of that home, and they would have a general idea how much water they would be using and what their bills would be. And we would have a starting point to know, we or whoever the water purveyor is would know how much to expect that homeowner to be using. Let me jump down to the the last one, and that's the series of things about updating our design guidelines. That's something that we have been working on for quite some time, but we need to put more emphasis to that and get that before the council quickly. Hydrozone design, what that means is grouping like water-using plants in zones so that the irrigation of those zones is particular to that class of plants. So if it's all low water use plants, it provides low water use. So many times what we see is a mixture of high water use and low water use, and so then what gets done, high water use. Rotating sprinkler heads, you saw in Mr. Dassler's presentation that that's something that the County Waterworks will be giving $4 rebate for each installation of a rotating sprinkler head. In my own property, I did that I guess starting about 6 months ago. I jumped the gun, and I'm not going to be eligible for the $4 a head rebate, but let me tell you, they really do make a great difference in the amount of water, and it's more specific as to where it falls on the ground. The pressure regulating devices to match hydrozones. Most irrigation systems are designed for a 30 psi or 30 pounds per square inch pressure in the pipe. Most of our water services throughout the area exceed 30 pounds per square inch, and it's necessary that it do that. So it varies from area to area throughout the city. But if we were able to put pressure regulating devices on for each one of the hydrozones, then again, we could make sure that only the amount of water that needs to go through those sprinkler heads would get to that particular area. Right now, if you get 60 psi, probably the number is not exactly right, but it's like putting double the amount of water through the same heads on an irrigated area. More ideas for new development. We think that we should immediately adopt or very soon at least, adopt the AB 1881, even though it is still in its draft form. It's been that way for some time. It's going through public review and comment and other development, but we think that it's a very good document and one that would be wise for us to go ahead and adopt now. We have given some thought, and the council may want to substitute for that 2,500 square foot exemption a 1,000 square foot exemption. So it tightens up even further, since we are in the desert, the amount of landscaping that would go into each developed property. And as we talked about earlier, adopting a local plant list to substitute for the one the state will have. I know that all of the departments of the city are already working to try to bring city facilities into compliance with the new ordinance. That will be, just as it will for our citizens, an ongoing process. We believe that it would also be good to set up additional incentives for landscape conversions beyond what is being offered by the water purveyors. We think that that would encourage even more participation there.
We could say that for the next one. We have it broken down into 3 sections right now, so I'd like to keep it.
Do you want to start now then? Okay.
Yes, if I could. Because that'll be for the non-landscaping one, Section 3. That doesn't happen to be on the other people's agendas, but on the most updated one. Thank you, Mr. Williams. I think what I'd like to do now is to take public comment on, and if I can, as I go through, and I don't mean to be rude to you, if you start speaking and you get tangential on us and start talking about something else that's not to point right now, I'm going to ask you to wait and put you to the end. But right now I want to take public comment on new building landscaping ordinance. That means sprinklers, plants, xeriscaping, desertscaping, all those kind of things. Okay? And I thought right now, just to make one comment, on our, we got an email from somebody, I won't say who, that said that we should have consulted the newspaper's expert on the watering or the wasting ordinance. And we actually did, and he was here, and we used what he said. So I just want to make that public statement. We did use him, and he's here tonight, and he's one of our first speakers. And I'm sure it's on the xeriscaping, landscaping stuff, and we'll love to pick your brain.
Good evening, Vice Mayor and council members. I'm going to make it pretty quick tonight, and I'm not trying to put anybody on the spot, but staff has been working with the City of Palmdale staff on the model ordinance. And I'm in full agreement that I think we're ready to adopt pretty close to the state standards and can move very forward to it. I know Palmdale, slight version changes, which at staff level we have agreed with. They already have theirs to the attorney so that they can bring it to the city council already and adopt it prior to what the state is going to adopt or whatever they're going to adopt. So I would really recommend that we continue to work with Palmdale, and that I would believe that LA County would follow along, and probably Kern County in the same area, so we are getting a regional plan. And it shouldn't be any shock to the developers, because guess what? It's a state ordinance, and it's going to be all up and down this whole state. So there's no need to rewrite the whole book when I think it's out there. The 1,000, from the 2,500 to 1,000, and that's probably my one that I'm not sure of. Our recommendation when we were first looked at this, and maybe the 1,000 is fine, but the change is because residential is so different than commercial, that the 2,500 is maybe really good, and if the state, there's actually recommendations to the state to make it 5,000, that we could write a separate ordinance that was actually even different, because it wasn't as commercial, for the residential to pick up from the 0 to 2,500. If that makes sense to you, that might actually need a different ordinance. When we first started writing the ordinance before the state came out, we had a residential one, we had a multifamily one, we had a institutional one, and we had a commercial one, because they had different requirements for irrigation systems. And so after I first saw the 2,500, I was all upset about it, and we said, after thinking about it, I was going, well, maybe you should go to 5. You could be more restrictive by making one from 0 to 5,000 that met with the residential. But probably right now, mine is, I'd go with 1,000 or even 500 square feet and get it on the books and get it going. The second one, real quick, plant list. The city of Palmdale and Lancaster. Basically, we've been working on a plant list. I've got the plant list on my desk right now, going through and reviewing what grows here, what doesn't grow here, and coming up with the uniformity coefficients. So that's in the works right now also, and can hit the streets very, very quickly. So that's kind of the two things. The water wasting ordinance from last week, I never saw a final version, but I do like to congratulate the city council for wordsmithing it, working it, making it a better document. The only thing I saw real quickly on there that I didn't catch from the attorney was the change of watering time. March 1st is too early. We freeze all the way through middle of April, so it really needs to go to May 1st, not March 1st, so we don't have the freezing problems. Thank you.
Like I said, on these ordinances, this is a work in progress to some extent too, and when we find things that are, we're going to try to keep it flexible. One thing, Mr. McEwen, on this landscaping ordinance, there's going to be commercial and residential, and it seems like a majority of it is a duplication, so we can just within the same ordinance say, for commercial units, this is the number, for residential, this is the number, and all keep it within the same ordinance?
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think that's a problem at all, rather than have two separate ordinances.
Right. Okay. Thank you. Patricia Helton?
Hello, Vice Mayor and City Council. Excuse my appearance. I came straight from work. Jonathan Urban asked if I would speak to you guys today about water conservation, because I do sell synthetic lawn. But just to give you a quick breakdown, your average household uses about $66 on bi-monthly for water expenses, which is about $396. Mowing costs average anywhere from $1,200 to $600 a month. Fertilizing, $45 twice a year, about $90. Yearly aeration, about $25. So your total maintenance is about $1,700. Total sod installation cost is about $480. One-time installation of that, not including sprinklers, if you need to put your own sprinklers in and stuff, or have it put in by a landscaper. A quick breakdown. If this is on an average of a 600 square foot house, a lot of the houses today are being built are a lot larger, as you know, but let's just do it off of that. $3,000 to have a synthetic lawn put in on an average 600 square foot yard. With that would come a warranty, of course, but yearly maintenance service, $0. Yearly watering cost, $0. Total gross of installation cost is $5 per square foot. Installed, so like $3,000. So reoccurring cost would be $0. One-time cost of $3,000. Over a 5-year period, after 5 years, your total cost for that yard would be $3,000. With a breakdown of the water of grass, your first year installation would be $2,100. Yearly expense to maintain that over 5 years at $1,710 comes to $9,030. So you're saving over $6,000 just by putting in a synthetic lawn or any form of lands, dryscape or hardscape. The reason I got into this business was for water conservation, so I push any type of hardscape or landscape if it's going to conserve water. Your average house takes in about, as was mentioned earlier, about 70% goes toward landscaping alone. Average house, again, with the figures that I was given, uses about 41,000 gallons a year. Now, if 50% of that was to be saved with the hardscape, because you're still going to be using some water outside to water, say, shrubs, trees, and whatnot. But even if just 50% of that was saved, that would be about 20,000 gallons, which is 100,000 gallons a year, and you multiply that by, 67,000 single-dwelling homes in Lancaster. So that's a great deal. So with this, we're also coming out with synthetic shrubs, again, which is also going to conserve water as well. But that's just a quick breakdown just to show you that you can save a lot of money and water by doing any forms of hardscape or landscaping. Okay?
Thank you very much. I have a card here from Kathleen Spohr, and it says chloramine, so I'm going to put you down at the end for the open comments. Richard Wells.
Good evening. My name is Dick Wells. I'd just like to caution you on a couple of items. Number one, I think that when we do these ordinances, we need to work together, all the cities and all the areas, because Palmdale Water District, we had a real problem with people across the street watering like crazy, and the guy across the street who was in the city not watering, and it caused a lot of issues. So I think we need to be very careful and really the whole area needs to go together on this. Another thing I want to caution you about that I found out at one of the aqua conferences, they're having tremendous problems with the artificial turf with bacteria and stuff like that. So I think you really need to really visit that real well before you make it part of what you're suggesting people to do. Thank you.
Thank you. Vernon Fiera.
I do live in Lancaster. I live in a home that's 1,880 square feet, 4-bedroom. There are only 2 of us live in the home, plus 3 dogs. So how are you going to go and distribute water by the number of people in the home or by the size of the home? Now what I've done is in the front lawn, I've had some brown spots. The base of it is not very good. Water drains off. So I put some turf on there to hold moisture better. And that's cut the lawn much greener than it used to be with less water. I relocated some of the sprinkler heads so that less water sprays on to the sidewalk. In the back, I replaced some of the sprinkler heads with a different water system where the plants are. Inside, I put a small tankless water heater under the sink and the hot water line. Why did I put in the hot water line? When we first moved in the home 7 years ago, I found out that when I turn the hot water on from the water heater, it takes about 30 to 35 seconds before I get sufficient hot water. By putting a small tankless water heater under the sink, I have instant water from a dishwasher and from my water. That saves water right there. Plus, I have electricity on the water, dishwasher. I don't have to use the heating element to heat the water. And back we have a water hose on a reel. It gets quite hot. What do I do when I turn the water on? I drain the hot water into a 5-gallon bucket. And I use that water the next day to water my potted plants. When I clean my tools, I clean the water is high enough and then to put it into a pot, clean my tools there. Now this doesn't sound like much, but I figure I can save about maybe 4, maybe 6 gallons a day, which doesn't sound like much, but when that adds up to an awful lot of water. Now, when other people would do that, as one individual, we could save a lot of water. When I first moved into my new home, the timers were 15 minutes a day, 3 times a day. Water was going into the street. I finally got it down where very little water goes in the sidewalk. In very rare occasions, none goes in the street. This is how I do my little bit to help save water. I appreciate what you're doing here. It's about time we start doing something. We have a crisis. It's too bad to have to wait before I had a crisis. But if everybody does a little bit, then your job will be easier and we're having a less water problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Okay, I'll look through the other speaker cards, and most of them are on some of the other topics, even though they somewhat relate to what we're talking about. What I'd like to do now, if we could, if it's okay with the rest of the council, is we have a checklist here. I think and I'm just going to take it as if nobody, basic parliamentary procedure, if nobody objects to what I'm saying, then it's a consensus. I think we all realize that we have to adopt at least minimum the state plan.
Yes.
Like staff suggested. I think we want to make it. Yes. Go ahead.
I forgot to mention a couple of things I wanted to hit real quickly.
Okay.
One, with the reduction of lawns, which I think we're all agreeing and going with, one of our problems is our street tree ordinance. We're using trees that, whether you take the lawn out or not, you're going to use just as much water whether you had there or not. And if you looked at the pictures from Las Vegas and some of those other areas, they didn't have trees. And trees are actually using more than our water, so then you run into urban heat and things like that. That same Randy's talking about if you do one for the other. So I think something needs to be adjusted or thought about on that. The landscape ordinance also doesn't cover, it doesn't cover the backyard, and that's one of the ideas of doing the front and backyards together.
Right.
Because I think if we can look at Las Vegas, pools need to be addressed somewhere, and they consider pools the same as lawn in the way of usage, that they use the same amount of water. So if they're allowed 1,500 square feet for the backyard, you put in a pool, that counts the same as your lawn. So, again, that's something that's not in the ordinance that needs to think about. And then the other one is, which I don't want to throw mud on the parade, currently, I believe you plan check 4 homes in a development to make sure they meet the ordinance when it's a new development. And now if you're talking about drip irrigation and plant materials and all that stuff, you're probably talking about you really need to plan check every one of them. And you're also talking about a lot more plan checks, a lot more staffing to do it. And I know I'm jumping ahead right now, but it's on the same lines. Las Vegas, when they did the lawn buyback, they had 34 people just monitoring the program, because a contractor comes in and says you have 3,000 square feet of sod, and they go out and measure and it's 1,000 square feet of sod. And so when you start doing some of these things, you are talking of a staffing issue. It's not the price of the lawn, it's the price of the staffing. So price of this is going to go up because you're going to have to plan check a little bit more.
We'll put that on item 3 for you, or item 4. I think that we want to adopt the state landscaping ordinance. I personally feel that we have to go farther because of being in the desert. I know that we've had discussions on what Victorville does, and so maybe if we just go through, Mr. Williams has already given us a little bit of list, and maybe it'll just make it quicker if we go through and start making out a checklist and get a consensus. We're not really voting on anything tonight, but if the majority of us say, yeah, this is the direction we want to go, it's got to give, the whole purpose of this meeting is basically so when staff walks out tonight, they can go and write an ordinance for us. Right. The first one that I think, and it's not on his list, but I think it's the first one that is the big discussion item, sod versus turf. What's the percentage? Where you got to put it? Now, Victorville doesn't allow any sod in the front yard whatsoever. They allow, Randy, correct me. Yeah, that's it. If I'm wrong, is it 30% in Victorville in the backyard? 30? I'm not sure. It's either 20 or 30%. Now, one of the ideas that in one of our meetings that somebody had brought up is that if we do say, okay, we set the amount of square footage for landscaping, but instead of saying there's no turf in the front yard, give them an opportunity to say, okay, you get 30% sod. That's all you get. Where you put it, front yard, backyard, is up to you. And that, I think, gives a little bit more flexibility so they can use artificial turf as part of a landscaping hardscape. Or they can use some sod, but it's judiciously, but they get the choice. They want it in the backyard so the kids can play, if they want to incorporate it. That would be my suggestion to start off with. And so an input from everybody else.
Well, I want to go back to what you said. I want to get clear about the direction that we're heading. I'm going to assume that we're going to give staff a laundry list to come back and do a draft ordinance. And I know people may hear wrong tonight, but I'm questioning how many homes are being built right now in Lancaster. So my preference would to see us come up with a laundry list and then maybe go to a workshop so that we can get buy-in from the BIA and some of the other organizations in Lancaster. Not that we have to have them sign off on every deal that we do or decision that we make, but I know we're here tonight with earnest to make sure that we move forward and take action, because obviously historically no one's really taken action. But I don't know if a month from now or 2 months from now we're really going to see a tremendous amount of water savings. So I would prefer to move ahead with the thought process, let's create the laundry list, then this come back and do at least one workshop so that we can take input from the public, rather than have them bring back a draft ordinance and then for us, with someone only maybe 3 minutes to speak, then us come to a conclusion and vote. I think we need to find some kind of a balance here. I'm 100% behind you. I think that we need to adopt something much more stricter than this, because I would ask the question, if we took all the communities in California, and this is going to be the state ordinance, this kind of balance out Lancaster in relationship to the Central Valley versus Northern California, and I think that we need to be probably a little more disproportionate share of what's in here, meaning less.
I agree with you, and just a little change on it. I think in talking with staff is that, once we get with our laundry list tonight, that they were going to actually start formulating it and approach the other stakeholders of the BIA or the other people. The development isn't going on right now as much, like you said, and so we have a little bit of flexibility. I think it needs to be done a little bit sooner than later so they can take that input. Myself, I get tired of meetings, and I don't know if it's necessary to have another workshop, then we have another workshop. But if staff can make them part of the process and they're happy with it, and staff comes back and says, look, we've met with the BIA, we've met with these other agencies, and they're good with it.
Realtors Board.
Right. All the different stakeholders, then they're fine with it. Or if they're, fine to a certain extent where they're going to have to live with it anyway, because we're getting, from the stat mandates anyway. So I agree with it. Yes, we have to involve the other stakeholders, but I think it could be done rather than coming up with some ideas and then having a whole other workshop and taking it in. I think staff...
Vice Mayor Smith?
Go ahead.
If I might say, what we can do is exactly what you propose. We can come up with a draft ordinance, circulate it to the stakeholders. They can provide comments. Also, the public will have an opportunity for comments as well as it's presented, and you can take it at a council meeting or some other venue. But as a matter of course,
I feel
we would
better
do
about
that.
I was a little bit worried
ordinances.
about the direction that we were going here. I wanted to make sure that there was clarity because, like I said, I understand the basis of this. I might even want to go on to as far as to say maybe this becomes whatever ordinance we come up with new development becomes the basis in which we try to work around trying to go back in and deal with existing. Because you've got to use some kind of a goal or a direction that we're going. Right now where we would get the biggest bang for the buck would be for everybody to be in compliance with the emergency draft ordinance and then go beyond that. But I just want to be clear so that I understood where
that's good. In fact, what you're bringing up is actually one of the ideas that I was going to bring up in Section 4 is that, we have a standing inventory of about 40,000 homes now. We don't have many new homes going up. So in Discussion 4, how do we get a change, a paradigm shift from, the residents of where we are now, where do we go from here, and some of the ideas that are going to be brought up, or if it's water, I don't want to call it water credit trading because that means something else, but a trade of developers coming in and refitting 300 homes so that they can get a zero net balance, or if we have grants from the state, grants from the county, grants from other projects that we can actually, redevelopment money that we can use to help citizens make that shift. And so, but those are for some other discussions, but that's good. That's exactly the direction that I was hoping we'd go to. So back to the Sodom and Turf. I'll just start it off as a base. I'd like to say 30% of the total landscaping turf, and it has to be one of the turfs that is...
Can I do
Yeah, go ahead. You're the expert.
I hate to keep interrupting, but these first three slides that Randy did, which is really good, they're all required by the state model ordinance. So there's no really choices. The only two choices I see is the 1,000 feet versus the 2,500. And then the lawn you could solve in two ways. You could either set a number, or remember the first slide that Mr. Neal presented, talked about a water budget. You could just lower that water budget to whatever number you want to, and they have to decide whether they want to budget their money for sod in the backyard for their kids, or they want to budget for the swimming pool, or they want to budget for plants, and they're going to have a very dry landscape in order to get the lawn. You could adjust that number lower than what the state is calling for, and then it gives it up to the homeowner, the developer, and the landscaper to actually decide how they want to utilize that. Or you can set a number. I know Palmdale's talking no lawn in the front yard too, but I'm kind of one that says just set the number and let everybody choose.
Yeah, you're an expert. You can figure out all those numbers. The average person's going to go, huh?
They'll have to do it in order
to
do the plan.
So let me get this right, and then it'll make it easier for us. You said, Mr. Weisenberger, that the first two slides, one that says new development, landscaping, and new development.
Actually, the
Number
third
three
one,
also?
The third one also is basically there.
Okay, so
There's a
the
couple on
first
the bottom.
three slides, Mr. Williams, the first three slides, every one of those, as they stand in basic form, are in the state.
Except for the 1,000 square feet.
Except for the 1,000 square foot. So what we're going to do is we're going to go through here and look at each one and say, do we want to make it tougher, as Councilman Mann says, and as I would like to do, like we're talking about turf right now. It says limit turf area. Well, it doesn't say how much, so that's what we're
The
going
model
to
state
say.
ordinance just says limit unirrigatable turf and no areas less than 8 foot, but it has no number to it.
Right, and so those
That's
are
what
the
we're
things
picking
that
up
we're
for
looking at.
the water budget.
Right. So if we look here, we have if it's okay with the council, like I said before, I'd like us to go forward with the plant list that's been developed by the experts in the valley. I think it's going to be a workable list as long as we put in the ordinance some kind of mechanism. So if somebody comes up and says, hey, look, I got this species of cactus and it doesn't use any water, but it's not on your list, that planning is able to go on the fly and say, yeah, this one is good, and we can add it to the list. Is that good with everybody? So, okay,
Yes.
so the plant list one is, we're going to go with the plant list that staff has developed with the consortium of whatever you guys named yourself.
Antelope Valley Water Conservation Coalition.
Yeah, okay, one of those.
The water guys.
Plant. So we'll go with that plant list, but as long as there's a mechanism to add plants and on the fly. Full site landscaping for the developers, front and backyards, it has down here. Limit turf area. So, discussion for the council. What do you think? 30% turf, front or back, however you want to use it, or do you want to get more complicated? Like Mr.
I think we need to settle. I think we need to.
You said we need to have two limits. I think we need, I don't have a problem with the 30%, but what happens if somebody's got 3 acres or 4 acres versus somebody that has, I mean,
Isn't that taken care of by the amount of square footage that you can put per? How does that work?
No, Las Vegas, what they have is, I think it's 30% for the backyard or 1,500 square feet.
Right, so
If
it's
you have
either or.
If you have a huge
Yeah, it
lot,
just about has to be
you'd have
that
to
way.
do 2 acres, so.
Yeah.
So that sounds good with me. Is
Can
15?
we settle on one question first? Are we going to require a developer, and I think it affects the equations here, are we going to require developers to landscape both front and back?
Yes.
Yeah, I think that moving forward, I would be leaning towards that, because I think what happens is we could create a landscape and then somebody ends up doing the backyard and it's as exorbitant and lush and not them necessarily understanding. So, I mean, that's just a thought I have.
Because we as a city wouldn't have a whole lot of control over when somebody takes their half-acre dirt backyard and says, I'm going to do whatever I want.
Right.
Other than the cost of the water to them.
Well, I think if we have a landscaping ordinance, if it's new landscaping, that would cover any new landscaping other than just new construction. Right? I mean, if somebody decides, I'm going to rip out my zero-scape front yard, I'm going to put a bunch of sod out there, they'd still be under the onus of the ordinance, wouldn't they? Depending on how we write it, Mr. McEwen?
Yeah, but they will be for the later version of those things that are not specifically to the new development. This portion would control what activities the developer, the builder, would do.
Okay.
As far as the front and backyard idea, I believe, and maybe others would join me in that belief, that most people, if they buy a home that is fully landscaped, they're not going to rush right out and change that landscaping if it is attractive.
Right.
But if they have no landscaping in the backyards, then there is no control over them at present.
Right. So back to the 1,500, is it 1,500, 30%?
That's what Las Vegas is.
30% or to 1,500 square feet maximum. I'm good with that. Everybody good with that?
We
Okay.
can use that as a working number unless somebody comes up with a good reason why it should change.
Yeah. Okay, separate meters for landscape and domestic service. Now, is that going to be a mandatory one?
That's mandatory.
Mandatory, okay.
5,000.
Well, the state ordinance says it would be for landscaped areas greater than 5,000 square feet. I think it would be worth considering having it installed for all properties, all developments.
Okay, let's...
Mr. Williams,
There's something that we would want to do
Because we could tie
for
it to
that, however,
pipe.
and that would be to make sure that our water purveyors, as they, that the connection fees to provide total water service do not grow by any significant amount. Perhaps it would just be for the cost of the second meter alone, but they wouldn't get to charge a connection fee for domestic meter and another connection fee for the landscaping meter. So the cost of doing so to the developer builder would be roughly the same, but the long-term benefit is then the homeowner could track specifically how much they're spending against landscaping or outside uses versus how much they're spending inside, and it'd help them to target.
Right, in the water district, too.
And Mr. Arcilio asked a question about rate structure, and in a later segment, we do have included a proposal that we work with the water purveyors so that the lifeline, the domestic service, would be at one lower rate, because it is pretty consistent across all residential properties at least, and then the landscaping would be at a much higher rate, so that there would be penalties then for that specifically. Details would have to be worked out, but we think that that would be a good approach for this.
Okay.
Could we not at some point in time, this may be really wishful thinking out there, if we had 2 water meters, we were using reclaimed water, couldn't we direct connect to that landscape? I mean, I'm not quite for sure. That's pretty aggressive, but that would give us that freedom, would it not?
But certainly is a possibility. It would require some additional plumbing, but
it requires
I
dual
think that
plumbing,
the recycled water could be used entirely for the landscaping.
Right. And there's the question there. I mean, you skip ahead of what Councilman Mann here says, recycled water only irrigation on new development. Is that part of the state code too? Because if so, does that mean then you have a dual piping system?
It would.
Okay. So that's already going to be state mandated anyway.
We require that it is rarely, in fact, I only know of one facility where we presently have dual plumbing going in, so that there would be recycled water going in for toilet flushing and urinal flushing and those types of things, and then another water source that would just be for consumption areas. That project happens to be the e-solar project that's up on Division Street in Avenue G, where we're putting in that solar power plant.
So if you have dual piping also, I mean, if it's going to be required by the state to use recycled water for irrigation, you have a dual piping setup, that also gives you the opportunity for a gray water system, because you can't unless you have a dual piping system.
That's right. The state is not requiring that. That is something I think that is above and beyond AB 1881, but it's something that we would be able to implement.
To just look at?
Again, we will have to develop
just
that
leave it in there and let him
carefully for you and bring it back with a specific proposal as to how we think it would work best for our community.
It's easier to take things out on the fly than it is to put things in.
Yes, sir.
Right, Mr. McEwen? Yeah, that's always the case. Here's the one, I don't know where AB 2717 has it, but mulch.
That's like Torah.
Yeah. I know, maybe that's just an educational thing. That's actually part of the code.
It is.
Okay, so we'll just skip that one. Weather-based irrigation system controllers, that's going to be in the state code. Landscape water budget for each unit, so that's going to be in the code there. Is there anything else from the...
Back up, weather-based irrigation controllers, so those have to be the ET things or moisture
there are
sensors?
Actually, there are a couple of different styles, but I think what we're talking about is setting up weather stations, and these would be radio wave operated so that they would periodically check what's going on with the nearby weather station.
You could just have a receiver that would... Okay.
But there's another system, and that would be to check the moisture in the soil and precipitation that has fallen during the previous 24 hours.
Okay, and then homeowners association, sustainable landscaping, the Xeriscape only.
In a meeting earlier with Mr. Weisenberger, he suggested, and I tend to agree, that maybe instead of calling it Xeriscape, we call it sustainable landscaping.
Yeah, that's right, the green landscaping.
Yeah, I just kind of like that terminology because so many people have a bad taste in their mouths about xeriscaping, and it's undeserved, as you saw from some of the photos shared by Mr. Neal earlier.
Well, they get it confused from xeriscaping and xeriscaping.
consider.
We might have to pay the Colorado Water District because they've copyrighted xeriscaping, so.
Yeah. But we are proposing in this particular item that for the landscape maintenance districts, the common areas that are in the public right-of-way, that we would only install in the future a xeriscape or sustainable landscaping improvements there.
Okay. Yep. Sounds good to me. Hydrozone design, absolutely. I think in any xeriscape, sustainable, what am I supposed to call it now?
Sustainable landscaping.
Sustainable landscaping, okay. Sustainable landscaping, hydrozone, that's just mandatory. That's just, now, I don't see any dripper systems in here, but is that all part of it? What rotating sprinkler nozzles, okay, that's fine. Limited spray nozzles or low angle only. Is that pressure regulating devices to match the hydrozones? Is that the drip system stuff?
In the state ordinance, they go overboard on irrigation systems.
Okay.
You know, they have pressure regulating sprinklers, draining sprinklers, so you don't have water draining out on the street, anti-draining sprinklers. It's all listed in there. The hydrozones are all listed in there. I think the state ordinance, our ordinance had 8 hydrozones. We came up with 8 different hydrozones for a landscape, depending on shade and wind and slope and everything like that.
It'd be like a quarter gallon per hour, half gallon per hour, whatever the.
And that would be an advantage, and I'm going to go back a little bit. Advantage, I'm not necessarily a big fan of dual water meters, but it's a big advantage of water meters because we shouldn't tell everybody if their water meters are old and they're on drip, they may not even be reading the water they're using because they're putting out such a low flow. The meters may not spin fast enough to pick that up.
So if everybody's okay with that, we'll give staff to come up with the drip system or whatever they deem fit on that. I mean, especially the hydrozones, though, too. We have to regulate that for that. Okay. Let's see. Next page here. Adopt the state no model. That's what we've been doing. Substitute the 1,000 for the 25,000 exemption. Now, maybe
we're talking for residential at this point.
Yeah, are we gonna? Yeah, we were talking about doing that, but then we'd come up with something for commercial.
I think the way Ordinance 629 is presently written, it exempts residential properties. This would not be consistent with Council's direction a few minutes ago about 1,500 square feet or 30% turfed area. So I think that we should probably stay with the 2,500 square feet for residential properties.
And then include pools in that also? That the pool would be part of that landscaping because of the water use?
Surface area of the pool would count as square footage towards...
For the landscaping? Okay. We're already adopting the plant list. Provide sufficient resources of enforcement ordinance. That I don't think that has to do with the, that's a budgetary item. Provide public education. That's a budgetary item out of the communications or wherever Mr. Bozigian wants it. Bring city facilities into compliance with the ordinance. Absolutely. I think we're working on that now. Okay, the incentives and stuff, I think I want to talk about that down at 4 again. What's that?
Separate issue. Yeah.
Right, down there. Okay. Now, let me see if there's anything else. Let's see. Grading.
Take it back to, we're saying different pathways for residents and commercial. I'm hard-pressed to find a reason for turf in a commercial development. I understand residential because we've all been a kid, and it's fun to play on grass. I can't see a real need for turf in a commercial application unless somebody can think of something. That
I agree with that. It also takes out the idea of Mr. Wells, right? I think brought up the thing of the bacterial problem with some of the turf. Well, they're not going to be playing on it.
Just a quick one, and depending on how it's written, because that's why we did different. Multifamilies, apartments, complexes may need turf if you're going to call that commercial or not commercial. They may need recreational areas, and I think the term that a lot of people have gone to is calling them recreational areas, so that you're talking about a large turf plot for playing, throwing the ball, playing baseball, and that would be a recreational area within a needed commercial. You may have some of your kinder cares or some of those are required to have playgrounds. So I think there are some exemptions or waivers depending on if it's just one ordinance in there.
So if I see what you're saying, Councilman Cilio, then we would require no sod whatsoever on commercial projects. They can put artificial turf in, And then we would look at apartment complexes and things, exemptions for recreational areas, but still none of this huge amount of turf that they have surrounding the place. They can use artificial for that.
I would lump apartment complexes, because it's places where people live, and with residential in general, seeing commercial in terms of retail and industrial uses.
Right.
But that's a good point. There's going to be maybe some exemptions for things like daycare facilities and those type of things.
I can envision an apartment complex or a townhome complex where they have a recreational area, but they love to put an ocean of grass all around, the complex. And I just think that if it's just for decorative purposes, that needs to be artificial turf.
Okay.
Or xeriscape. That's my own. Okay, so that's where we're going at. So, okay, the only thing that I think we missed on there is Mr. Weisenberger and I were talking about the grading. Now, what was the type of grading you said? I forgot the name. I should have wrote it down.
One of our common residential problems, but it's even commercial, and some of it can't solve. We worry about getting water out of backyards, off roofs, and everything drains to the street, which automatically leaves your irrigation system draining to the street. In Las Vegas, they have a term they call echo berms.
Echo berms.
In which the grass or the grade, I shouldn't call it grass because we're talking about no grass, but the grade goes away from the sidewalk and then back up to the house, so if any extra flood, sprinkler breaks, drip breaks, something happens, it comes down, gets captured in the landscape and not run over the sidewalk and then become nuisance water.
There's a swale.
And so it's a swale, but they're calling them echo berms, which I thought was a neat term.
I know for a while our planning department or our engineering, it's like all the lawns are like this. So they just automatically drain. Everything drains to the street. So maybe incorporate echo berms in that. Also, if you're doing hydrozones, it's really important to have sort of an echo berm within the hydrozones, so that if you have other runoff, it sort of waters the plants.
If you have drip, you shouldn't have runoff.
You shouldn't have runoff anyway. So okay, everybody good with that? Okay. Well, Mr. Williams, how about our non-landscaping conservation slides? We're all set. If everybody's good with that, I think the staff has Mr. Bazigian, Mr. Williams, everybody clear on the direction the council would like to go now? I think we've got
ammunition.
Yeah.
Now, again, just a proviso, we will come back, and some of this research may lend to a different conclusion, but we're clear.
And you can talk to some of the stakeholders. Okay, great.
I think most of us have probably heard everything on these next couple of slides pertaining to non-landscape conversion, but there are some somewhat unique suggestions in here. When we did these, new landscape conservation, not conversion, this section was directed at new development. So it would be, again, conditions that we would impose upon builders as they go about a new project. And, of course, that expense would be passed along to whoever would be purchasing that completed project. Again, much of these are already included. Some of them are also part of AB 1881 or other state regulations, specifically things like double flush toilets. I think you can imagine the reason why they're called double flush toilets, so I won't go into that. But a number of these things have been around for a long time, and they've been installed by some more progressive property owners or people who had specific problems. I think that we could consider making these, again, mandatory installations in properties. Maybe the council would prefer to limit that to properties, and now I'm talking about square footage of living space. Maybe they would want to limit it to properties above a certain amount and then exempt properties below a certain amount to try to keep a more low-cost opportunity for property owners.
I'm sorry, I missed that, Mr. Will. I missed that. You're saying that, like the low-flow toilets or the these things should be limited to larger square foot?
No, I'm thinking more like circulating pumps and tankless water heaters and those types of things. They do add some expense. It's not a huge amount of expense, in my opinion, but nevertheless some expense. And I know builders will be reluctant in some cases to adopt those, but it's something that we should discuss with them and try to convince them. So I would propose that we go forward with this initially across the board and then see where we arrive in the process of discussing the ultimate draft. Let me move on to the second slide in this series.
This first one is kind of radical, I think, and that is require the developers to install high energy or high efficiency, low water use, low energy use clothes washing machines. Right now they put in the connections, and I'm just saying let's have them go the next step and make sure that we get water, low water use, low energy use facilities in those homes by them installing it. I think it would be a feature that would be appreciated by most home purchasers, and it shouldn't add an awful lot of expense to a property. I think we might want to consider establishing water management benefit assessment districts in new tracts. This would be a means of collecting some fees annually that would help us to continue to manage and provide water supplies throughout the city. It would be something similar to what we do for drainage maintenance districts and streetlight maintenance districts and landscape maintenance districts. With this would be focused at providing a source of funds used only for water supply management. The Vice Mayor earlier mentioned gray water systems. This is a system that takes water from showers and lavatory basins and clothes washing, puts it in a tank that's on the property, and then filters it on the property, and then makes it available for reuse and landscaping purposes. It could be tied into other systems as well, that, as the Vice Mayor pointed out. Pool covers, we think that requiring pool covers, if there are pools built, would be a great thing to do, again, to reduce the evaporation rate from the pools and also to maintain temperatures that might eliminate some of the expense of energy to heat the pools. We talked earlier about draining to sanitary sewers. I think we could require developers of all types to look at driveways and parking lots and other paved areas and placing in those areas porous paving materials. There are porous asphalts. There's also porous Portland cement concrete like you would see in sidewalks. There's also the paving stones and so forth. So there are a number of options, and what this does is it keeps more of the water on the property, allowing that water to re-enter the groundwater basin as opposed to running off to Rosamond Dry Lake and then evaporating. Council might also want to consider requiring the same kind of installation for sidewalks. And maybe instead of a paved type of sidewalk that we're used to, maybe instead we start building something that looks more like trails. We have a number already around the city where we have disintegrated granite that makes a very nice walking surface. Frankly, it would be a lot less expensive in the long run for us to maintain something like that, particularly with the tree roots and so forth that periodically raise the panels from a paved sidewalk. You know, we have a backlog to replace those uplifted sidewalk panels. It's about 2 years, and it just keeps growing, but this might be something to consider. Something we talked about before would be to work out a procedure and a program whereby new development would result in a net zero gain or some percentage. Maybe we say, okay, all you can do is add 50% or 25%. But ideally, it would be you come into the city to build something new, net zero gain or increase in water use. So that means they install everything they can think of according to this ordinance that would reduce the water use on the property, and then they would go out to existing properties that are already also high water using properties and then install fixtures and fittings and irrigation systems that would lower the amount of water use there to balance it out. So again, there's a net zero gain. So those were the non-landscape kind of ideas. In some cases, they relate back to landscaping, or they have the potential of going back to landscaping, but they were different enough that I felt they belonged in this separate section.
Okay,
are there questions about any of these before I sit down?
If I understood you correctly on the new development, did you say that most of these items were going to be mandatory by the state anyway under the AB 1881?
I think there may be some in here, but most of these are most of these are new, or they have been in place for some time, like low flow toilets. Mm-hmm. Those have been around for a long time, but they keep improving upon those low-flow toilets. Right now, I think state law says it's 1.6 gallons per flush.
Okay. But I guess what I'm asking, excuse my voice, is that are some of these things going to be mandatory by the state? Install high-efficiency clothes washers. I'm just thinking about what are we going to do in Lancaster that's going to require developers to do above and beyond.
Well, that's the whole purpose, I think, of this evening's activities, is to decide how much further to go. We know we're going to be required to adopt something that is at least as strict as AB 1881 and other state laws that are in place, such as for low-flow toilets and such. The question is that going to take us in our desert community as far as we need to go and as far as we want to go? And I think the answer is it doesn't take us quite as far. So some of these ideas mirror what state requires at present, but others of these ideas go a little bit beyond what the state would require.
My other thought was, in discussing this, was the redevelopment properties that the city has purchased. When we go in and we purchase those properties and we start to upgrade those, are we going to maybe lead in this area with the landscaping and some of these items? Can we do that?
Yes, ma'am, that's the next section.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and the answer is yes, we're already implementing that as well, our redevelopment agency.
Well, thank you, Mr. Williams. Well, there's a number of these that look like they can already start being adopted, I think, in the planning process, not in the landscape ordinance, but if we get a consensus, I'm just going to go through them. If somebody objects to it, we're just going to give it to staff and say, look at incorporating it into our planning process. Low-floor toilets or double-flush toilets, waterless urinals, I guess that would mean in the commercial sites, unless somebody's putting urinals in their houses. Low-flow shower heads, manifold-based plumbing.
What is manifold-based?
Yeah, I was just going to ask that. What is manifold-based plumbing?
Anyone?
I'm sorry.
What is manifold-based plumbing?
It used to be, and that certainly is one that deserves some explanation. This is becoming a wider practice in the plumbing industries. What it means is that they have a distribution system to which all of the lines, say you've got 3 bathrooms and you've got a kitchen. Now let's say that's the only place that you send water. There would be a separate line that would come from this manifold to go into each of those rooms. And the advantage to doing that is you can reduce the size of that pipe and still have the same amount of water that flows through it, but that's necessary for each of those installations. And that means there's less water in the pipe, especially the hot water pipes, that needs to be flushed, if you will, before you start getting hot water out of it. It's been around for a while. It's becoming very effective. It's becoming preferred by many plumbers, I think, and we just think that it might be something good to add to our building standards. The other system would have a big looped system, and maybe it's got an inch or an inch and a half service line coming out of the primary service, and then it would have multiple branches off of that would go to the individual room. So in order to, again, get hot water in your kitchen, you'd have to flush just about everything in all of those larger diameter pipes throughout the city and throughout the residence in order to get it to the source where you wanted it.
Now,
so
how about
that's what that's all about.
Mr. Williams, instead of the manifold-based plumbing, you have down here on-demand hot water heaters, but one of them is a tankless. Now, I know the tankless is not necessarily the one that you want. There's one that, I think it's the circulating one, and would take care of not having the manifold, is that you don't wait for the hot water, you turn it on, and it like circulates the water so there is no cold water in the pipe as it's coming out. And I think Tom DePrima was telling me about that's the one that you should really go towards, because that gives you an on-demand water without flushing out all that cold water also.
It does, but in all of those systems, there's still an amount that needs to be flushed out just to get it recirculated to the right point. The recirculating pumps, they can use more energy as well, in that there's 2 different systems that I know of, at least, and probably more. But you can have a circulating pump that is constantly running, so it's constantly turned on, so that when you open the tap, then it starts circulating water through it.
And then there's another process where you put it on a timer. So then on the timer, then it would run continuously during those periods where you feel that you might need a hot water service on a regular basis. I suppose there's a third type, and that would be the type that just runs constantly. I think the manifold-based plumbing system, there's a place for both of these, or for all of these, and I think that what we need to do is just evaluate where they might be most applicable in each case. Smaller homes, maybe something with a circulating pump would be better. Larger homes, perhaps the manifold system would be better.
Okay. That sounds good. We'll move forward on that one. Recirculating pumps for decorative displays, install high-efficiency clothes washers.
Going back to clothes washers, requiring them to put them in. If there's an exemption, if someone buying a home has a high-efficiency washer they're bringing with them, some people bring their refrigerators and appliances with them when they move into a house, as long as that's dealt with in some fashion.
Excuse me, I also believe that there's an issue of markup as well, too, so I think that's something we can look at, but I think there needs to be exemptions in there.
Right. Okay, so we keep it flexible when you look at that. Pool covers and pool drains to sanitary sewer, and you're talking about the no-cost permits, so at least we'd regulate it so it's at the same time. I think if it's okay with council, I think all of those on the non-landscape ones are ones that staff can work on immediately. The one that I think is going to take some time, and we'll put it not on the back burner, but put it as a mid-range goal, is a gray water system, because there's a lot of other complications with the health department and with that need to be looked at, so that can't be done right away. So out of that, and also the porous pavement and driveways of parking lots, I think that's something that needs to be maybe investigated a little bit further than something that we can just say. I mean, we can say on the low flush toilets, we can say tomorrow or on the next ordinance, hey, this is what you got to do. On the driveways, I think it's got to take a little bit more investigation. Am I correct on that?
We have some commercial developments in the city already that are going to be putting in a porous paving system in their parking lot. And so we've been trying to help guide some people along, but doing it more on a voluntary basis. I think that it's probably something good for us initially, at least, to do in the commercial and industrial areas. But there are some issues with it, and I think, as with everything, there's always, let's say you've got an auto repair shop where there's potential for spills and so forth. Maybe we don't want something that's porous there, and we just need to consider that in the course of setting conditions on a development. But if we know this is a standard thing that we normally would look for, then that's the starting point, and then we can back off to negotiation and appeal, if necessary, by the individual developers.
Okay, that sounds good. The only one on here, and you and I have discussed this already, so you know, it's nothing that nobody's going to be surprised at. Water Management Benefit Assessment District. That's a big no vote for me, and I'll tell you why, and I'll tell you what the alternative would be. To me, the Water Management Benefit Assessment District is just another tax district, and it's just raising the taxes of maybe people that are conserving. Mr. Weisenberg here might have a wonderful, sustainable landscaped yard, right? So why should we tax him because the knucklehead next door is watering his driveway every day? I'm still one that believes in a pay-for-play, and if we can have some kind of partnership with the water district that you have some kind of higher assessment on the people that are wasting water. However you calculate the baseline, and I think there needs to be some adjustments on how we calculate that. But if you have somebody that really is wasting water, well, they get hit for $100, $200, $300, whatever it is, over the amount. That money that can be maybe set aside to be used as a rebate later on to say, okay, I've had enough. I'm ready to zero-scape. I'm ready to do these changes. Okay, you do these changes. We got money to rebate. That's a pay-for-play. You're making the people pay for the ones that are wasting instead of spreading the wealth around to everybody that is doing their job. And so I don't know about you guys, but that'll always be a no vote for me. So I would say I don't even want the staff to even look into it.
Mr. Smith, if I could just add one thought to that. It may not be clearly understood that this idea is proposed for new developments. And so it just means that any new tract that would come into the city, in order to help this community make the necessary adjustments, they would be paying an additional small annual fee for that purpose. And it's, I clearly understand your point of view, and I can't say that I disagree with that point of view, but, when asked to give you good options and bad options.
Those are options. You just know how and see, then I'll just come back with, well, then you're going to have part of the city that's paying the tax to do it, and the other part that's not paying the tax. I think we have a lighting district that was having a problem for a while.
We have 3 benefit assessment districts that are in that category.
I think there's more creative ways of generating revenue for the same purpose.
We'll offer some of those to you later.
Great, I love that. Okay, so if that's good with, then we got direction for staff on that for sort of our second range.
Can we hit sidewalks and DG instead of concrete? Do we, I like the idea of converting to DG and having more of a trails look as opposed to your standard 5-foot wide sidewalk, or however wide they are. Do we have any ADA issues if we get away from concrete sidewalks?
There may be some that we have to address, but, in the course of developing this, we'll consider that. I appreciate you bringing that point up.
And there could be any EPA problems with porous parking lots because you have, Mr. Ludicky might be good on that, because I know in planning you're always looking at, depending on the parking lots, is you got transmission fluid, you got oil, you got brake fluid, you got all these things, and if that's all percolating into we want to get the water percolating in, but it might be percolating all that other good stuff too. So, but that's something that you're looking into. Okay.
Net zero water use impact.
Other creative. Yeah. Let's see.
That's a big item.
Yeah, I think that's more to discuss here with the.
Next item.
Other creative items. Okay. What I'd like to do, because there's a couple cards here that I know that had water ideas for this before we go through the lengthy slides, unless anybody has to take a break or anything.
I would be good with about 5 minutes.
5-minute break? Okay, let's take a 5-minute break then. And then when we come back, I want to take Jonathan Irvin that has that fits this topic, I think a water idea, and then Mr. Frank Donato that had also a creative idea for item 4. So 5 minutes. Should I bang the gavel? I am. I'm getting the show on the road. I don't know if we want to go on the road, but we can start now. Mr. Bazillian's back, so.
Thank you for pointing that out.
Okay. Mr. Williams, did you want to go through the other creative ideas, or can we just look through them and see what we want to discuss? I know the meeting's going long. I think we've accomplished a lot of what we've wanted to do. I think we could sit here. I think we could sit here and talk about water for the next 10 days.
And if we didn't drink anything in that process, think how much we'd save.
That's right. That's right.
I'm perfectly happy, sir, if you want to discuss these items at another time.
Yeah, I'm going to look at, I have a couple speakers cards. I think I want to just throw out some ideas, and any of the other council members to throw out some ideas to us, not really for as much discussion, but to think about, to bring back for another time. Some of these ideas are not going to be a simple, let's get it done next week. It's going to be, it might not get done for a year or two. It's going to take some other agencies, some other cooperation on some of these ideas. So I wanted to put it on here so we can start ruminating about it. But Link, get the two speakers cards. Mr. Donato? No, he's there. I saw him.
Pretty sure he's right there.
I'm still alive. Thank you, Councilman and staff. First of all, I want to really commend you for really jumping on this, because this has needed to be done for a long time. And it's one thing that people talk about and people take action. One thing I did notice that we are going to save a lot of water just today alone, seeing all the bottled water around here, that we don't have to use out of the tap, so that's pretty good. But I want to talk about the pilot program, something that I wasn't aware of. Being an AVAC, let me go back. I'm an AVAC director, Antelope Valley East Kern Water Agency director. I've been there about 22 years. And I also have a vineyard here on 42041 20th Street West on Lancaster. So I'm Lancaster, I'm very concerned what happens here. But this pilot program that was talked about, I find it very interesting, the one on F and 60th, which is about 96 acres. I believe there should be a little more communication, especially with an agency the size of ours, because AVAC just went out and spent $20 million to purchase land for a recharge program where half of it is unusable. And we could have taken that $5 million and just handed it to you and it saved us another $15 million to be part of the program. So when you're dealing with that kind of projects, AVAC needs to be involved in those projects, because there's a lot of things we're going to go be thinking about doing where we're going to be spending a lot of money, but maybe we don't have to spend that money. Maybe we can participate as partners with the city of Lancaster on that project, because it sounds very interesting. Number 2, pools. You need treatment to treat sewage. Everybody knows that, and by putting chlorinated water in the sewer, it's going to also cut down your cost in processing the sewage treatment plant. So something you got to take a look at that very seriously, because that's very important. Number 3, by allowing people to run their water down the street, I know you're talking about using construction water. There's an issue with that, because I think the people regarding the West Nile disease, where you're creating pockets of pools of water by letting this run down different areas, will cause a lot of possible problems with the mosquitoes and everything else. So better put it in a sewer so you don't have that kind of problem. The most important thing I want to talk about real quick here, time-wise, I know you want to call it Zeroscape, but a town in Elsinore, I sent some of the emails to the staff regarding we have a foreclosure problem here in the Antelope Valley, and Lancaster knows about it, like everybody else does. Why don't we start implementing on the, not counting the properties you're buying, but basically let's go after the banks. Let's go in with a program of some type to go in and Zeroscape these properties, because the neighbor next door, the one down there, can't sell their house because half the block has been blighted because of these dead lawns. The banks don't care. And by the way, there is no bank. There are asset management companies that represent about 95% of the investors are overseas, or not here in California, or not here over there. They don't care about us. And I meet with these people constantly all the time. So I better, I guess I got to move. But
well, I'll ask you a question. That'll keep you going here. Now, you had talked to me today about what city is it that's using that tool to go in there, and they're actually saying, I think, what you were telling me before.
Yes, Lake Elsinore, what they're doing is right here, it's called the Green Lien, and basically what they've done is the city and the municipalities have agreed to take 1,000 of foreclosed properties, and the asset companies have agreed where they can go ahead and start watering the lawns to keep them green, and then they would voluntarily take the lien onto the property, and when the property is sold, they're reimbursed. But I see a problem with that. I mean, the concept's great, but we need to reverse that with Zeroscape, because we don't want to use the water. We want to go the other direction, but do the same type of volunteer lien. And I know that the people that are involved with these projects would be happy to participate. There just need to be a formula or some kind of participation between the entities.
So you kill 2 birds with 1 stone. You take care of your blighted property, which we might be able to use redevelopment money for, and you also get Zeroscaping starting in homes that are the standing inventory. Existing neighborhoods.
I would like to have our staff look at this idea.
Right.
I mean, obviously, conceptually, it sounds good. There's also a significant implementation component that would cost some money as well. So we will certainly take a look at that. And it was, Mr. Donato did provide staff with that information.
Okay. Yeah, these are those long-range, more investigative kind of maybe we can, maybe we can't kind of ideas that we're talking about now. So.
Well, just remember, it's very important that you control this, and these people are outside the area. And I know that you're doing it with other ways of where they're not boarding up the houses, and you're giving them notice. If they don't, you go do it, and you're going to put them on there as a lien as well. So you're going to see a lot more houses. I just did a forecast. The Antelope Valley's had 2,400 foreclosed properties in the first 6 months, which means we're going to be doubling it by January 1st. So if we make it a long plan, you're going to have twice as many as you see today by January 1st. So something I would really take a look at. I know if I was a neighbor in those neighborhoods, I'd be very concerned. I would like to see something in the city, especially you're already doing with the redevelopment agency. You already got a plan starting in place already. Thank you very much.
Thanks. Mr. Irvin, who's on our Planning Commission. Right. So, Commissioner Irvin.
With lots of reading material.
Vice Mayor, Council, thanks for having me. I'm actually here as a regular citizen, and this...
No, you're never here as a regular citizen from now on. You have to realize that.
Water conservation during the campaign in April, it was a huge concern of mine, and I had an idea then, and I started looking into it a lot deeper. You have to excuse that work. My staff, I don't have a staff like you have. My staff is my wife and my 6-year-old son, and his penmanship, as you can see, is a little lacking. Of course, 60 to 70% of our water is used by landscaping, as we know. So what we need isn't a quick fix. It's a lifestyle change in Lancaster. So what I'm proposing is water budget allocation. This has been adopted by Irvine, California, as well as Tucson, Arizona, and they use half the amount of water we do. Palmdale is also looking at it. I went ahead and called our neighbor, and they're also looking at, they're having an analyst come in, and they're going to analyze their water budget allocation. And what that does is, when a citizen goes over their water budget allocation, it's called economic signaling. It will let them know when they're using too much water. What that would account, well, the problem with this is that we have to get our purveyors together and on board to go with a rate structure. And they have a tiered system now, but it's not nearly as stringent as what we need to get people to stop having that, hey, water's going to be there type of attitude. We need to change the rate. And to do that, and I know it could be political suicide for you guys, that's why I'm handing it to you. You guys can take this idea, but you will see immediate results.
Should you raise this motion on the commission?
No, not at all. Not a legislator on the commission, but I'm raising it to you so that maybe the staff can investigate and see if it's possible for the purveyors to get together and we can change our rate structure, because currently I don't believe it's working. People think that they can just water the street and they're not really seeing any problem with that. Also, the second thing we should do is offer, this is what Las Vegas does, per square footage rebate. If a citizen, let's say $1.50 per square foot, the city gets a grant, and the grant, unfortunately, there's a grant assistance program, and it's July 21st is when it's due. But if we ask for $200,000 and we can, replace a lot of lawns that way, hey, we'll give you $1.50 per square foot if you go ahead and go to xeriscaping. I think that's a good idea also. Lastly, I think the billing structure needs to be changed also. It's the major purveyor, Waterworks District 40, it's every 2 months. It needs to be monthly so the citizens can monitor how they're doing on their conservation. And that's one of the changes that needs to happen. And the grant deadline, the 21st, which is Monday, but I think we still have time to ask for money for xeriscaping. And I have some things written up. All you have to do is contact me. In your packet that you have here is our current rates for summer and for winter compared to the second sheet you have. The third sheet you have is Irvine, California, their rates. And the third sheet you have is Tucson, Arizona. And those are comparable to desert climates. Irvine Ranch Water District, their plan has worked when they went to water budget allocation, and you have a packet on that also.
Great.
Thank you for your time.
Can you tell me again which rate sheet is which that you handed us?
The first two rate sheets are Lancaster.
Lancaster.
The next one is...
The third rate sheet is Irvine, California.
Okay.
And the third rate sheet is Tucson, Arizona.
Is Tucson.
And Irvine Ranch is the community that it's seeing immediate results.
Right. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Thank you very much, Mr. Irvin. I think this is something that Mr. Williams has brought up, and I think we brought it up even during this meeting, is that there needs to be a look at, the county has an inverted rate scale now, but maybe it needs to be a little bit more, severe. There needs to be a carrot and a stick. Mr. Bazigian?
As we're talking about this and maybe some of the other creative ideas, I think it's important to point out to the public that the city is not a water purveyor. And, in talking about protecting the city's interests and funds and such, we do not collect funding for a lot of this. So we really do need some of the purveyors, the retailers, and our partners to also step up with this as well, too. And I just want to caution you that from a city budget perspective, we need to make sure that those that are collecting funds for this type of thing are also paying.
Right. No, absolutely. Okay. Down here for other creative ideas. I think, we've touched on a lot of them. I think if the council reads through here, Mr. Williams has talked to us before about a number of these ideas. I think some of them are more long range, some of them are not workable at this time just by a council agenda item, because it takes the purveyors and it takes other partnerships. But I think it's good that if we read over these, and maybe we can set another time on the agenda for the regular council if there's anything that really sparks a lot of interest. Anything from anybody else on the council of any other creative ideas that we'd like staff to maybe look into and maybe come up with? Anybody else?
Mr. Smith, as I was listening to the deliberations this evening, there was one other item that I thought we could add to this list that would be necessary, and that's for us, after new ordinances are adopted by the council, to go back and review all existing elements of the municipal code to bring them in line with what new ordinances, because there is some confusion out there on that. So we'll make sure that we do that as a matter of course.
Right. I know some of these on higher density development and other kind of land use things, we're looking at that on the general plan update at this time also, and that's going to be something that we're going to be discussing and working on also. Councilman Cilio, you had something?
We really haven't addressed the last item that's on the screen there, which would be net zero water use impact for new development. I think that's zero impact is probably onerous. I don't know if there's any other city that's doing that, or we need to come up with some number or some range that we should be targeting that staff should be looking at, I think. I don't know what your feeling is as to what, is it 50%, is it 25%, is it zero? I don't know what the...
I think the idea on that, we've discussed it, I've discussed this a lot in length with Mr. Williams and Mr. Bozigian also, is the idea is there is no will-serve letters right now.
Right.
So the net zero gain of water impact for a developer would be like if he comes in and says, I want to build 300 homes, and we say, where's your water? I don't got any water. Okay, well, one way that might be able to get it, not calling it water credits, but to say, I'm going to go to 300 homes and I'm going to retrofit them and zero-scape them and bring them from 330 gallons per day per capita down to 150 gallons per day per capita, and then my project is going to be, 120 gallons per day per capita, and therefore I have a net gain. Can you give me my will-serve letter? It's a creative idea. It's got to take a lot of partnership, and it's not going to be easy, but I think it's something that we're looking at. I know we had a meeting with Borax, and Borax was looking at their corporation has about 300 residents in the Antelope Valley, Lancaster and Palmdale, and they were looking at what if they came in, ripped out the lawns, zero-scaped, retrofit the homes. Could they get a little bit more water for their plant from ADEC? And so, but those are all, that's partnership. That's, I think we go back to the same idea that there needs to be like, well, that's for a whole other topic. Needs to be one water master. But
yes. Yeah, a lot of these ideas are become problematic because we have so many water purveyors serving our city.
Right, and it's hard. I think the newspaper hit it well. It's hard. AVAC, I mean, we work real close with AVAC, but, as Mr. Donato said, well, you're working on this, but we didn't know it. I mean, it's hard enough to get departments in the same city to make sure that they work and know what each other are doing, much less different agencies. So it's something, and I think that's, we could sit here and talk all night about adjudication, about water banking, about a water banking district for the valley. I mean, there's a whole bunch of stuff. But
I suspect we'll be talking about adjudication later this year. So.
I think we're going to be talking about that next week.
Okay.
At a closed item session on the agenda.
All right.
Well, I have, looks like I have ones that didn't hit the topics, but 2 of them are about water and one's about pedestrian stuff. So, Mr. Vara. Pass this time. Okay, great. Kathleen Spore. You wanted to speak on chloramine?
Come on up.
Come on down. You're on. Do you have some handouts for us?
And this is for you.
A lightweight handout, I see.
You can give them to Mr. Bozigian and...
Hope he doesn't throw out his back.
What I brought to you is documentation about what I'm going to talk about to reinforce what I am saying tonight. So I'd like to thank you very much for this opportunity of speaking. My name is Kathleen Spore. I'm a director of the Rosamond Community Services District Board. I'm speaking as a concerned mother tonight and grandmother and friend to the people of the Antelope Valley. Chloramines, the combination of chlorine and ammonia, are not the only solution for water disinfection, but it is the worst solution. A cheap solution for AVAC in terms of dollars, but not in human health and suffering. There are better solutions. Chloramine creates fewer trihalomethanes than chlorine and can meet EPA standards, as chloramines do not react with the contaminants in the water the way chlorine does. In fact, according to the World Health Organization, chloramines are 2,000 to 100,000 times less effective as a disinfectant than chlorine. And just one of the nasty things chloramines will not kill is E. coli bacterium. Chloramine has a high residual life in the water that the homeowner cannot effectively filter out. It can't be boiled out, distilled out, nor will it evacuate the water when the water is left standing. AVAC is demanding that the water purveyors of this valley pollute their water supply with chloramines to match AVAC's supplemental water supply disinfectant, because chloramines are incompatible with the chlorine treatment that is currently being used by water districts in the Antelope Valley as well as East Kern County and Edwards Air Force Base. Chloramines are used at a much higher volume than chlorine, 2 to 3 parts per million. Because of those levels, it will corrode and cause water pipe failures, booster pump repairs, sewer treatment plant deterioration, even with the anticorrosive chemical that will be added to the drinking water. Your constituency will experience health and home costs as well. Lead leaching, deelastation of PVC pipes, pinholes in copper pipes, buildup of toxic bacteria in water filters, the seals, gaskets, and toilet parts and hot water heaters that will have to be replaced often. On top of that, more difficult water treatment for aquatic life, koi included. Pets can have a sensitivity to reactions to chloramines. What about our human health? The EPA IRIS document clearly states about chloramines that no studies on inhalation exposure, no epidemiological studies, inadequate animal carcinogenicity data, and quantitative estimates of the carcinogenic risk from oral exposure are not available. How many people do you know that are infants, elderly, had chemotherapy, organ transplants, or other weakened immune systems? They will need to boil their tap water for 10 minutes to kill the pathogens that chloramines won't kill. But that won't protect them in the shower. 50 to 80% of the contaminants in the shower spray are aerosoled into the air, and when inhaled, they enter the bloodstream. The skin will also absorb the equivalent of 8 glasses of water contaminations. Oh, wow. Okay. Would you knowingly inflict this upon the people? Inflict rashes, bleeding, blistering, scarring, asthma-like symptoms, gastric...
I'm going to have to cut you off here, Steph, we have lots of reading material. So,
you do. Do you have any questions?
No questions for you at the time. Any questions from council?
All right. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you. Let's see. I know Mr. Wayne Wood out there. I know him. I don't see him. He must have left. So, is there anything else from council? Anything else from Mr. Bozigian?
And at the risk, I'd like to just take 1 minute to point out that really want to thank our public works staff. Most of these folks have many other duties. We don't have a water division that this is all they do, so I think they did a fabulous job. And on behalf of staff, we'd like to thank council for clear direction. I think it's a lot of this is politically unpopular, and Vice Mayor Smith and council, I really thank you for that, and I hope the other elected boards that have responsibility are as responsive as you have been. So we really thank you for the direction.
I know Mr. Wells had said that, we need to all work together, and I know the City of Lancaster has been trying to put together a water ad hoc committee now for about 6 months, and hopefully we're getting to the point where it's actually going to happen. So, well, in that case, we're adjourned till next Tuesday, the 22nd at 5 o'clock.